This conference will now be recorded. This conference will now be recorded.
I do, and I'm wondering, Eden's so much smaller. How are we doing this, Rob?
Johnny, how many boards?
How many boards? I'd say 12. 12 or 14. Well, we might have more than that, but I think there's 12 or 14.
What was it?
I said on the interviews, I couldn't tell you exactly how many. There's about
Over volunteer.
There's about 695 people.
Really?
The non-potable system that got.
What are the popular ones?
Planning and land use
Okay.
probably gets the most heat. Our transportation's pretty good. I think our historical and
We usually.
we got a pretty good one.
Yeah, we got a small group there.
Yeah. I mean, we got some pretty active.
People want to save
folks.
some buildings, so let's just say. No, it's like,
Gonna be a while.
we've got to save that now.
Are you recording? Okay.
Yeah, go. Really good. Recording so much.
Good. Okay. Good evening. Let's call the regularly scheduled meeting of the North Front Range Transportation Air Quality Planning Council to order. It's June 1st, 2023. It is 6 p.m. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, we have a quorum. That is good. Let's open for public comment, please. I'd like to open our meeting for comments up to 2 minutes on that which might be on or otherwise not on our agenda. Any comments from the public this evening? I'm concerned I do not see Mr. Keats. I don't know where's Steve? Okay, seeing no public comments, we'll move on. Acceptance of the meeting agenda. Hopefully you've had a chance to review the agenda. Are there any additions or corrections, please? Okay, let's move. Chair would entertain a motion to approve the agenda, please.
So,
Second.
Motion second to approve the agenda. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Number 2 is approval of minutes. Same. Hopefully you had a chance to review those. Any additions or corrections to the minutes, please? If not, Chair would entertain a motion, please.
Move to approve.
Second.
Motion and second to approve the minutes of the May 4, 2023 meeting. Further discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. This is the lead planning agency for air quality agenda under reports. Number 3, Air Pollution Control Division from Jessica. Is Jessica online? Okay. Good evening, Jessica.
Hi, all. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Wonderful. So happy to provide some verbal updates on happenings over at the Air Pollution Control Division. So right now we are heavily focused on ozone season and ozone planning. I'd particularly like to highlight that we have recently revamped our ozone forecast emails, so they are a lot more accessible to folks, including myself, who are not meteorologists, but I want that more plain language daily update on the ozone forecast, including when we're forecasted to have high ozone days. And our handout includes links that y'all can follow to sign up for those updates. On the planning front, the division is undertaking efforts to reduce ozone pollution in the Front Range. In alignment with the governor's directives, we are particularly focused on strategies related to oil and gas drilling and pre-production operations, as well as engines, particularly diesel engines, as well as natural gas engines under 1,000 horsepower. We are intending to propose regulations before the commission this fall to reduce emissions from those sectors. We'll be continuing to hold monthly technical stakeholder meetings along with broader public outreach meetings between now and the fall. And I can put a link in the chat or send it over to Becky so folks can get more information on when those meetings are and sign up for them. I'd also like to flag that we've been engaging stakeholders on our proposed Colorado Clean Cars program, which would advance the adoption of low and zero emitting vehicles in the state while still preserving consumer choice. And we are targeting a July rulemaking request before the Commission to advance that. Additionally, we've also been engaging stakeholders on potential fees associated with the emission of greenhouse gases in accordance with our statutory requirements under House Bill 21-1266, and I can provide a link with more information on that as well. In Commission-related news, last month the Commission approved the Division's request to hold a rulemaking focused on reducing emissions of greenhouse gases from the industrial and manufacturing sectors. Any folks who are interested in becoming a party to that rule can file for a petition for party status through June 15th. Last month, the Commission also approved the Division's proposal for enhanced permitting requirements in disproportionately impacted communities. This was a really involved rule, and we are incredibly grateful for all the stakeholder engagement we had that informed how that rule looks. And I'm happy to get into the specifics of what's included if folks are interested. If not, I can kind of pause for any questions or take my virtual seat. Thanks, y'all.
Any questions, please, for Jessica? Jessica, we appreciate your time. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks, y'all.
4 Regional Air Quality Control Council report is a written handout. It's in your packet. NFRMPO Air Quality Program updates is written, and that is in your packet as well. Oh, sorry, you're going to do that?
No, I was forgetting, sorry, there's no report.
Okay. Anytime you want to come up here, Medora, you are.
She felt the need to talk.
Which is unusual for her. All right, let's open the Metropolitan Planning Organization agenda now. Under reports, Chair is going to take a little liberty with his report. First, after discussion with staff, we would like to propose a new policy, and would, unless there's great consternation over some policy and where a discussion is needed, I'd just like to kind of adopt this in the fact that when we take a look, we've had this conversation before about how many members of the council it would take to direct staff. I think any of us who have sat on a town council, for that matter, on a board of county commissioners, know that there's a lot of money, a lot of time that's involved in staff input. And so if research projects are requested otherwise, we have proposed that 2 other council members would concur. So we would need 3 council members in order to send staff on a mission of research or fact finding. Suzette, if you'd like to comment further, I would appreciate it. But we think that's proven to the fact that staff time is valuable. And I think before this council sends them on something that could be heavy in workload, 3 of us need to agree.
Yeah, and I think that was the conversation that we had, and even though I think 3 has been sort of the number, no matter the size of the council or commission. And we have 15 members, and so the 3 seems to be workable. It just was, we as staff were thinking, if one person says things, does that mean that we need to go do that or not? And it was a little confusing. So I think by having 3, it helps give us the staff clear direction. So I appreciate the council considering that.
Go ahead, John.
So have we had situations where somebody, well, I don't know. I mean, I think that's odd. I mean, on our council, you have to have a majority, a consensus to move something forward. You don't have to have a vote, but you gotta have
This is
some
not so
consensus.
much moving an item forward. This is more like giving staff direction to do something.
But that's the same with us.
Yeah.
I don't get to go tell staff what to do unless I get council's approval.
Yeah, and that's the kind of way we want to make this plan.
I like to think I can, but I can't.
And so my request of council would be that it's perfectly viable. In fact, it's the reason staff exists, for us to make requests formally of staff, but it needs to be 3 of us in concurrence with that. And so if you have a question of staff, certainly phone the chair or bring it up at a meeting. But I will at meetings look for a concurrence of 3 before we send staff on a major research project or what.
I think it's pretty liberal. I mean, 3 is
Okay.
pretty easy to get.
Yeah.
The rest of my time, I am going to yield to the Deputy Director of the Colorado Department of Transportation in the fact that there's no need Herman sit here till 8:30 tonight. So
Herman's here?
He is here, yeah. Herman, we appreciate you coming up. I mean, it's a lot when you don't do the Zoom thing And please take the time you need. I know you have a presentation. You are, we're going to move your agenda item, which is down here at the very end of the reports. Yeah, that'd been around 8:30. We're going to move the TPR boundary study reports all the way up to just kind of under the chair report. So I see my time to use her.
Well, first, let me just say I appreciate that thoughtfulness. I was prepared to sit till 8:30. I wasn't excited about it, but I was prepared to. So I appreciate you're willing to do that. So I just want to talk a little bit about the TPR boundary study that CDOT is undertaking now. Give you a little background about it and how we expect to proceed forward. So I think you all know that it says Senate bill, it's House Bill. House Bill 1101 was the legislation that was related to reduced or free transit rides. Legislation was passed a year ago, and they updated it to provide a little more flexibility in that state funding for transit agencies. Included in that bill, as it was introduced, was a provision that was related to TPRs that says if you have any transit agencies in your TPR, then if you have one transit agency, then that transit agency will select someone to be a voting representative of that TPR. If there's multiple transit agencies in the TPR, then those transit agencies would get together and decide who they wanted to be the voting representative from transit agencies on the TPRs. So that was in the bill originally. I think many transit agencies already do this, some of them don't. But then when the bill moved over to the Senate, we included language at CDOT's request. The sponsor included language to do a boundary study of the TPR boundaries. So it generated a lot of controversy. It's not often a bill goes to two conference committees. It went to two conference committees before really, I think Senator Winter, the sponsor, and Senator Kirkmeyer, who you all know well, compromised and worked out what that language should be for the study. And when it did finally pass, the Senate passed it unanimously, and it has since been signed. The final version did include quite a bit of changes to what we need to look at as part of the boundary study. It also removed one important word for a lot of folks, analyzing the equitable representation on staff. I think that was expected to be related to population. The view was we shouldn't be looking at equitable representation. We can look at the representation on staff, but that word was of a lot of concern, particularly for rural Colorado. A couple of the key points. We never intended in this amendment to change the number of rural TPRs from the current number of 10. We now have statute that says when CDOT makes our recommendation, we will not make a recommendation that reduces the number of rural TPRs. So that will, regardless of what happens, that number will remain the same. The compromise also included some additional criteria related to the things that we need to look at when we consider boundary changes, such as lane miles, freight traffic, truck vehicle miles traveled, some things that were more specific to rural Colorado when those legislators were reaching out to the rurals. That's what they said they wanted to see as part of it. It also codifies a requirement that we have a public process, and I'll talk about what we expect that public process to be, to receive public comment from around the state. And then also important to note that we only, as the CDOT staff, make recommendations, and in this case, we'll make recommendations to the House and Senate Transportation Committees, the TLRC, but perhaps more importantly, the Transportation Commission. These are the Transportation Commission planning rules that list what the boundaries of each TPR would be. They have the authority to make those changes. They'll be required to open the rules. They'll be required to consider the recommendations from CDOT. They're not required to adopt those recommendations, and that will be an entirely separate process that adheres to the State Administrative Procedures Act. So the statutory requirements, what we need to look at, we'll look at the boundaries of transportation planning regions. We'll look at the membership of STAC and the membership of TRAC. And then also the consistency and transparency of the transportation planning process across all TPRs. In conducting the study, as I said, we'll have ample opportunity for public input. We'll report this to the Transportation Commission by November 30th of this year. Following us completing the study, the Transportation Commission is required to act on by opening the rules and begin consideration of our recommendations by June 2024. We think that we should have asked the commission to be done with that process by June 2024 because the statewide plan and regional planning processes, at least at the TPR levels, will kick off right around that time. The last thing we want is to be considering boundary changes at the time that TPRs are developing the regional plans. So we think that if we present our recommendations by November, the commission can potentially open the rules December or January, be done with it by June 2024, and not start that process in June. The factors for consideration on the boundaries is a whole host of things here: highway and transit corridors, DI communities, vehicle miles traveled, truck vehicle miles traveled. I won't go through each of these. I think you can see, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. Some of these were things that came out of the first or second conference committee. Some of them were things that CDOT had suggested. The order of some of these have changed, and these are listed 1 through 9. That was suggested at my last meeting. These ought to be bullets because they aren't in priority order. So we'll go ahead and make that change because they're not intended to be in priority order. But these are all things that we need to consider. Moving forward, we've already started gathering data. We're creating a mapping tool to assist in our analysis. Our GIS folks are great and can make a map, at least for most of these factors, can make a nice map that shows the TPRs, the counties, and then each criteria that we're looking at, and then have a publicly available tool where if you want to look at population and lane miles together, you can do that. Or truck BMT and regular BMT, you can do that because it may be informative to see each of those factors separately. It may be informative to be able to layer them, and we'll have a tool for any of us to be able to do that. I think that will also be helpful when we do kick off our state plan and our regional plans. I think having that information already, I think will be helpful and informative as we develop our long-range plans. Let's see, we've already started attending, since the legislation passed, we've attended every TPR meeting, we've attended a couple of the MPO meetings like this one, and we will expect to continue to attend in person every TPR meeting and any MPO meeting that we're asked to attend until the study is done in November. From that public input standpoint, we're at this point considering five meetings, one for each CDOT region, only 5 meetings, hybrid meetings, I think we're considering hybrid at this point, but 5 meetings in the late summer. We will have gathered a lot of data. We can then present that to the public. And I think the public is the TPRs, the MPOs, other elected officials not part of the MPOs or TPRs, and any other transportation stakeholders we can identify. The general public is invited to attend as well. We'll outreach to them. I don't expect this is something that's high on their radar screen.
Cool.
If I could spitball with you there, though.
Yeah.
While I couldn't be on stack, my alternate was incredibly helpful and informed me, in fact, I'm lying. You didn't inform me, I heard from somebody else back here, that Commissioner Hickey said that she would also welcome, the TC would also welcome comments from from communities, from the general public on boundaries. They could submit that, I'm assuming, as part of this public process. Then.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely. So we think we'll gather data and present that data without recommendations in the summer. And then in the fall, once we've developed some recommendations, we'll go back out and we'll let you all know at MPO and TPR meetings and at these public meetings what we think our draft recommendations are. Hopefully that gives us then still a month, 2 months even, to go back, take that public input, potentially refine the staff recommendations before we present it to the Transportation Commission. I've already talked about desiring to finish the rulemaking by June 2024 and not start it, so that will happen. Let's see, we've already talked about developing the mapping tools. We're assessing the TPR IGAs and bylaws. So MPOs, due to federal requirements, you all are all set, but there's some TPRs that have intergovernmental agreements, but they don't have them all signed by their members, or they have IGAs that form them, but they don't have bylaws. That potentially is a concern, especially if they're doling out now state multimodal option funds. There's a risk involved in not having a set process for how meetings are run.
Who would have primacy there? I'm curious as to who governs who. And I'm trying to be polite, not saying what gives CDOT the right to do that.
Sure.
To intervene between an agreement signed by two governments.
Yep. So we are required to look at, by legislation, at the transparency and consistency of the planning process across all TPRs. So we're required to look at that. That may yield recommendations. If there's a, and I think one of the particular areas of concern is if there's you're doling out state funds. NPOs do that, state fund, federal funds. TPRs typically haven't done that. Now they're doing that with multimodal options funds. There's a fiduciary responsibility that I'm a little bit concerned about, that we can't say you can't operate if you don't update your bylaws. But I think everyone that I know in the transportation planning process wants to do it the right way. And if we think that, and if they then agree, we make a recommendation, maybe you should adopt some bylaws. Then I suspect they probably will, and then we'll be ready to assist with that if they want that.
But the organization could still be free to adopt them in their own bylaws then.
Yes.
And make their
Yeah.
governmental agreements.
Yep.
Okay.
So Harmon, I might be foggy on this because I'm getting old, but NPOs are usually ran by a board, similar to this, right?
Yep.
And then TPRs are usually facilitated and managed through CDOT. Is that not the case?
Interestingly, no, it's not really the case.
Okay.
As I've started to attend more
I always thought that was the case. Maybe
CPR
not.
meetings, now we certainly, particularly the regions, not as much headquarters, but headquarters participates too. We certainly help. Oftentimes we're 90% of the agenda. It's transportation planning. The regions talk about the projects that we're building, receive input on what the needs are and what the priorities are from local elected officials. But interestingly, in some cases, there's a county staff person that manages the TPR, or a city staff person. In Steamboat, the same the same person has effectively managed that TPR for 20 years. In other cases, councils of government that may or may not have matching boundaries, which is another thing we're looking at. Doesn't mean that they have to match, but why don't they match? And oftentimes it makes sense that they don't match. But COG employees may manage it, and CDOT's there to assist, but not to actually manage. From the minutes and the call for agenda items and things like that, that's typically either a COG or a city or a county.
But checking for consistency and policies would meet the state and federal standards, that's CDOT's responsibility, right? I mean, typically.
I don't know that it's CDOT's responsibility to determine, except for transportation projects. This is the transportation planning process.
Okay.
Now, we follow the transportation planning process, we all do that, but when it comes to things like bylaws, I think we have not taken as proactive approach as maybe we should. So in addition, real quick, two things that are active right now. We formed an advisory committee, and I'll show you those members here in a second, and we're looking at doing maybe a survey, TPRs, NPOs, elected officials, general public, to see what folks think about. Are you familiar with your TPR? Are you satisfied with your TPR? Those kinds of questions. So this is the advisory committee. There's, I think, 11 members. It's a selection of current staff members, former staff members, elected officials that have never been part of this, a TPR before, have never participated in the TPR process, staff people. In this room, Suzette for this area, we've asked to be on it. She's agreed, and Commissioner Stevens has agreed to be on the committee. We have a variety of folks from around the state to help advise us. To clarify, I don't think that we're asking them to create the recommendation for us, but we are asking things like, if we go do public meetings, I don't want CDOT staff to do that in a bubble and figure out what that should look like. Let's talk to the people who probably would want to attend a meeting like this and find out how they think the meeting like that should go, or what they think the survey questions might be. And it's the same conversation I'll have at STAC. It's the same conversation I'll have at the TPRs to see what you all think the survey questions should be, or how we might run a public meeting. It's just one more opportunity to get a little more in depth with a variety of folks around the state that are not CDOT staff to engage them. I think that's my last slide. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Questions for the Deputy Director, please. Please.
I don't mind. Herman, I don't know which slide this is. It's like back on slide 2 or 3.
Okay.
I think we get a little hung up on the conversation of the boundary, but there's other things that we're talking about as well. It's the makeup of the track, and it's the makeup of STAC.
Yes.
So I think just to make sure we're all understanding what we're talking about here, it's not just the boundary, but it's those other things as well. So that's what the recommendation coming to the Transportation Commission is going to be on all of those.
Yeah, definitely. And we may think or make a recommendation that a particular TPR needs to update their bylaws. That wouldn't be a reason why we say, and therefore, because you don't have good bylaws, therefore we need to change your boundaries. That doesn't make a lot of sense. Fix your bylaws. If we don't recommend changing the boundaries, we're not going to recommend changing the boundaries. So it is two separate and distinct things. So appreciate that clarification.
Additional questions? You've got to get home for it's even dark.
Hey, look at that.
Before the game starts.
Yeah, before that's what's important for the game.
You're my favorite stack member, for sure.
Yeah, for the next 5 minutes. Thanks, Herman.
All right, thank you.
Okay, that concludes my report. To the Executive Director report, please.
Yeah, I have a few things that I have on my report tonight. The first one, as long as Anna Rose, as long as you're up there, we have been talking a little bit about the SS4A grants, and so we decided not to go after them, and so I've been talking about it. So Anna Rose is just going to give us an update on sort of our thinking about why we're not going to go after them.
Yes, so we had a couple discussions with the Technical Advisory Committee and also separate staff from the TAC to talk about whether or not it made sense for us to pursue an SS4A grant for an action plan for the region. And ultimately, the staff decided that now was not really a good time for us to go after that as a region. A lot of our individual communities are pursuing those grants, but given the different timing that people were at in planning processes for safety action plans, decided that it didn't really make sense for the NPO to go after it at this time. So just wanted to provide that update and answer any questions about that. And we still will participate in any of the action planning process that our local agencies go through, but we just won't be developing that plan through that grant at this time.
Okay, questions, Commissioner?
My question is, and that's helpful to understand, but my understanding is that in order to apply for safety implementation funding, an area or a community has to have done the action plan. So is the North Fort Range area pretty much covered by the action plans that are going forward? And that's why it wouldn't make sense for the NPO to do that. I'm just worried about communities and smaller communities that might not be able to do the action plan independently.
Right.
Being covered somehow.
Yes, and that was part of the discussion, and so it had came from some of the smaller communities as well, that now wasn't a good time, and so they understand that that is a requirement to be able to apply for those action plans, but given the request for funding that we'll be asking for to complete that action plan, had still decided that now wasn't a good time. So there will be areas within the region that wouldn't be eligible for the implementation funding, and the local staff were aware of that.
Okay, it's just concerning in terms of, again, the focus that I've been trying to raise around safety and the importance of having resources to go after that, and the assistance to smaller communities to be covered by an action plan is so necessary.
Yeah, and we can still revisit this during the next funding cycle, that might at that point make more sense, and also maybe at the times that some of the plans from our local agencies are completed, being able to fill in gaps places. But that's where we were at right now.
Just in case you're curious, mayors are allowed to arrive at 6:30.
I apologize.
At 6:30.
I was gonna blame it on Road 34, which is bad, but I did not plan ahead anyway.
Blame it on a Renovire.
I've never even been to the
Sorry.
I hear
It's the one exception.
I deserve it.
I just said hi, that's all.
That's what you get when you get a smart ass as a chair, too. So.
Can I just ask a question? Who is applying for the grant though, as far as communities go? We applied it, Denver County applied and we got, I think it's actually pretty easy to get the grant because there's a lot of money out there for it and for the planning grant. And what we heard at the NACO Transportation Commission meeting was that there was still quite a bit of money and a lot of communities hadn't applied. So is anybody here planning to apply for it?
I do know, so Larimer County and Greeley got it last time. Fort Collins has an action plan in place already. Weld County is going after it this time. Loveland and Windsor are possibly pursuing it or might complete it on their own.
And for the communities that have it, like if Fort Collins has it, they have, if you have a plan in place already, you can still access those safety. You have to prove that you have a plan, you have to show the plan before you.
Yeah, it has to meet
implementation.
certain qualifications to count as that plan.
Additional comments on SS4A?
Okay, the next thing I wanted to talk about is we have a program that we're running this summer called Pledge to Shift Your Ride. It is on our VanGo website, and that's the website that Anna Rose has up. But this is going to be running from today, June 1st, till the end of August 31st. And we're asking people to log in and take at least 4 trips per month to be entered into a prize drawing to get to be determined. This is to shift out of single occupant vehicle into some other mode of transportation. So you can shift from a car to a bike, walking, rolling, transit, carpooling, van pooling, teleworking. So for all of you that telework, at least part-time, you're eligible for that. That's utilizing the tools that are on the back end of our VanGo website already. So we just had that essentially refreshed and turned on. And this is in a partnership with our local communities, and we're promoting current events to get people out and about. So just wanted to make you all aware of this challenge that we have going on for this summer and that it is being done regionally, I guess, for lack of a better term on that. Any questions on that one?
Questions? What are the prizes? What can I win?
I don't know. Alex is being very public about that.
Lunch with council members.
Is that right?
Where are we eating?
Well, I usually get that. I usually have to pay for that.
I guess I have a question. How do you prove that you've done this?
You log into the website.
Okay.
And you put in your information into the website, and so then you, like if you say, I'm teleworking 2 days a week, you put in the days of the week.
I see. Okay.
Yep.
Great. Cool. Thank you.
Yep.
Wonderful.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yes. And then the next thing, do you want to bring up the presentation on the RAC? I prepared a brief presentation about our working relationship with the RAC. And I wanted to talk about this because last month we had a lot of discussion about the additional funds that the RAC was requesting for modeling. So without money in the mix, I just wanted to talk about what it is, the relationship between Norfolk Range and the RAC, and why we have them as our partners, essentially. You want to go to the next slide, please? Okay, so this is the ozone non-attainment boundary. We have, it started as an 8-hour ozone non-attainment area, and it is designated by EPA. We have to have a state implementation plan to perform our conformity determination. I think for all of you that have sat on this council for any length of time, we do a new tip or we do a new plan, we have to do a conformity determination. And that conformity determination is saying, how is our plans and programs doing against the budget? And that budget comes out of the state implementation plan. That is what RAC prepares for the state or the non-attainment areas within the state. So the RAC has been designated by the governor, and the RAC has been around for many, many years. And I'm going to give you the history from when we started with the ozone non-attainment area in 2008. But it is the governor that has established the RAC, has the executive orders that say this is how the RAC operates and this is what they do. So that's what this is. And if it's not the RAC, then who? Then who is going to make these state implementation plans? So it could fall to NPOs, it could fall to the state. In any case, I will just say it's a big lift because the work that they do to develop a SIP is complex. And I'll show you some of the table of contents from the state implementation plans. And I know we have a couple of RAC members, so if you guys see or hear anything I'm saying incorrectly, just let me know and speak up as Commissioner Brecky, Commissioner Stevens sit on the RAC.
Commissioner Brackett's
I'm
not on the RAC anymore.
You're not on the RAC anymore? Okay. All
One
right.
thing at a time.
Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so
6 years there.
this is just a summary of the different executive orders since 2008 when this area became pulled into the non-attainment area. So the first one was in 2009, and you can see, but if you look at this, and it says it was created by the governor in 2009, and they said that RAC is the lead planning agency for the Denver metropolitan area, but it really did cover the North Front Range area as well. It had a two-year expiration date, and it said it included the local government representative from the North Front Range metropolitan area, and they were tasked with reducing transportation-related ozone emissions, and that was their charge back in 2009. Then 2011, it was extended and amended, and it was to prepare air quality plans for the region to demonstrate and ensure long-term compliance with federal air quality standards. So at this point, the governor is saying it doesn't make sense to have a lead planning agency for Denver and a lead planning agency for the North Front Range. You're all in the same non-attainment area, and so that's this combination where they made the RAC just the one lead planning agency for the whole area. Then finally, we get to the executive order that was in 2013 that stays in full force until amended. And it expanded the participation of the RAC. There's now a member of North Front Range NPO, which is Commissioner Stevens. There's a representative from Larimer County, which is Wendy Koning from Estes Park. And then also Alicia Johnson is Weld County from the city of Evans. I'm going to go one more slide. So this is the list of the representatives. I'm sorry, it's really small. All of this is on the RAC's website. But yeah, this is the membership makeup of the RAC and who's on it that represents this region. Next slide. So a few definitions that I thought might be helpful since we have so many acronyms. We have enough acronyms in transportation, so now we have more acronyms in air quality. Right? So the first one is the state implementation plan, and that is a document that is prepared that goes to EPA that says this is how we're planning to get back into compliance with the standard that we have for ozone or whatever other pollutant that we're out of compliance with. The Clean Air Act is just that. It was an act that was passed in, I think the last amendment was in 1990. And there are some people that think we should take a look at that. Some people are definitely afraid to look at that. But I think that's what the Clean Air Act. The CDPHE is the Colorado Department of Health and Environment. That is who Jessica Farrago that did the presentation early on. That's who she works for. And they do run a lot of the air quality work. They do a lot of the technical analysis and things like that for the state. Then we have the Regional Air Quality Council. They are a nonprofit Colorado corporation, and they shall perform only the duties and functions that are specified in the executive order. So that is their charge. They are charged by the governor to do those specific things. And then the lead planning agency itself is responsible for making the state implementation plans. Okay, next slide. So this is just the chapters in the SIP, or some of the chapters. This is not all of the chapters in the SIP. The document itself, just for our region, is 245 pages long. So there's a lot of stuff that goes into this analysis and this work. They do the background, and if you look under number 4, if you can actually see it, which is pretty small, but they have 5 different models that they create and run. So that's one, they say, can you help us, spend some of the money on modeling? these are the models that they're talking about. There's several of them that they do. Coming out of the SIP, the highlighted one that I put on here that says the motor vehicle emissions budget, that is what we are most concerned with in the transportation world coming out of the SIP, because that is what sets the budget that then we then use to run the conformity for our TIPs and our plans. So the process for a SIP approval is the RAC develops it, it goes to the Air Quality Control Commission for approval, then it goes to the state legislature for approval, and then it finally goes to EPA. So it's a pretty long process. Next slide. And then this one, I scrubbed the RAC's budget. I pulled it off of their website and I went through this. This is their budget in some high level detail. Obviously they have salaries, benefits, and administrative costs. And then they really have sort of two different things. They have the ozone modeling work that they do, and then they have programs. And I think as you've heard from different presentations over time, that the programs are sort of optional. You don't have to participate in them. We don't have to have money to go into them. But the ozone modeling is something that the RAC does do for us. That, I think, is the end. So I just wanted to give you sort of this highlight about what that working relationship is that we have with the RAC. So I could answer any questions on that.
Is the RAC, so in a way, they're doing consultancy style work for the NPO. Are they a single source supplier on that? Are there other people that do that type of work? So they hire consultants themselves. They are a planning agency that then would hire out the expertise on the modeling work. So at this point, I would say, I think it depends on sort of how you would define it. So maybe they're thinking about it. They do the work, and yet they hire the consultants to actually physically do some of the modeling work. But bottom line is we're reliant on a work product from them, a product that could be produced anywhere at the fair market.
Yep.
So, might be appropriate to put out a bid on the product that we need.
Well, the challenge I would say is that it's not just North Range. It's the whole non-attainment area.
Okay.
So the whole non-attainment area could go out for bid.
Interesting. Yes.
Doesn't the RAC bid out that work to consultants? Yeah, so there's a free market component of.
Well, there's also a middleman that is a RAC. It is a nonprofit
Yeah,
organization.
they're just doing that. I think this is how you describe this is really helpful to understand the relationship between the RAC and the work for the North Front Range in the metropolitan area. It's really, I think it sounds like the effort years back was to try to streamline the work so that there's one agency doing that for both, or for the whole non-attainment area versus multiples.
Yeah,
So
and
it's more of a streamlining.
And I think at one point the state health department did this work, and for whatever reason that I don't know, it got sort of peeled off to the RAC, and I don't know why that happened.
Well, when we're asking these questions, I mean, are we dissatisfied with the work that they're doing? Or do we feel like, or you're just saying we want, I mean, I'm not, but I'm on the RAC, so I feel like, that they're doing good work.
I'm not saying anything. All I'm saying is, and I'm not saying it's good or bad, all I'm saying is that we have a lot of questions sometimes when the RAC comes to present. And so I just wanted to give everybody sort of a reason why we even engage with the RAC and why we have people sitting on the RAC, and so what they do for us in that modeling realm. So that was my whole intention tonight, is just to talk about what that relationship is.
The us, though, is the non-attainment area as a whole. Is it specifically for North Front Range as well?
So Wade, when they do when I was saying we need the motor vehicle emission budget, they produce one total and then they split it. We have the north area emissions budget and then the southern area emissions budget. So yes, they do it for the whole and then they split it between us and Dr. Chuck.
Okay.
And then I have one last thing, if there's no other questions on that.
Any other questions?
The last thing I wanted to say is that this is Medora Bornhoff's last meeting with the North Front Range.
That sucks.
NPO.
That sucks.
What do you want to come up? I was gonna say, that's actually one of the mic. Give me the mic. Kelly's cabinets tonight.
So her last day with us is tomorrow, and then she's starting next week, not giving herself any time off, which I think is a big mistake, but that's not just me. That she is starting with CDOT on Monday.
Congratulations.
So, Laura, did you want to let them know what you're going to be doing down there?
I
Yes.
can't.
Your role is Main Streets and Active Transportation Section Manager.
Oh, nice.
Right on.
I can't say anything bad about CDOT.
I have sent a strongly worded letter to Director Liu, which she promptly put in the trash. But your work for the NPO has been exemplary.
Johnny's paid to tell them they're great.
I'm not.
Okay, thank you, Suzette. Let me get a little bit here. Up next is the TAC report, which is written in your packet, as is number 9, the mobility report, and the community advisory committee report is written in your packet as well. So let's get on to agenda item 11 under presentations. The state thermographer presentation is Ms. Gardner here. Is she online?
She's online.
Okay, Elizabeth Lowe.
If you're talking, Elizabeth, we cannot hear you.
We can't hear you if you're going.
Really cool.
Is she there?
She's here. I can see her. She's unmuted on this, but we're not hearing her.
Oh, there you are. I'm sorry, Elizabeth. It's, oh, there you are for a brief second.
Yeah, okay. Can you hear me?
We can, yes, thank you.
Okay.
Good evening.
Hi, sorry about that. So thanks very much for inviting me. I'm sorry I didn't get up there for it. I had another presentation with a water presentation with the Colorado Water Conservation Board this afternoon. So worked out better to do it this way. So apologies for not being there, but I appreciate the time. And I'll just, I guess I say next slide.
Yes.
So perfect. So what I wanted to talk about was really what are some of the biggest trends impacting the state and impacting North Front Range and potentially things for you guys to be thinking about in terms of the future for Colorado. So some of the weird things, or maybe things you wouldn't really notice, is the fact that Colorado is growing at a slowing rate. So we're slowing down. Now, I say that as a state as a whole. Okay, so take it as that because within your region, that's not necessarily the case. We're seeing that births are down, deaths are up, migration is slowing, mobility is slowing across the country. But we have been seeing that we've seen this concentrated growth along the Front Range and really a lot of concentrated growth in the North Front Range, both jobs and people. The other piece that we're really seeing is aging and the fact that we're aging really fast, and that actually will also impact population growth and type of growth and maybe type of needs for certain areas. Some of the fastest growth is in the 65 plus. Some of the slowest growth is actually in the working age population. And we're also seeing even a slower growth in the kiddos, in the under 18. We're also seeing that we're becoming more racially and ethnically diverse, and that's important to know in terms of client base, for example. Next slide. So just to kind of prove the points is the fact that over the last decade, it was the second slowest decade for the U.S. And so if the U.S. is slowing down, that's going to impact its states. It's the second slowest decade compared to, and the slowest was the Great Depression in the 1930s. So that's important to see in terms of population slowing down. Colorado actually grew twice as fast as the US over the last decade, and we were 9th and 6th in terms of total and percentage change. But the last 2 years, we've seen a pretty significant departure for the state as a whole. Instead of our growth on average around 75,000, it fell to 26,000. So about a third of the growth than we normally see. And not only a slowdown in the total numbers, but also a slowdown relative to other states. So it's both slowing down and slowing down to relative to other states. And at the same time, we've seen that both over the last 2 years, 17 states lost total population, and then this last year, 19 states lost total population. Next slide. If we look at the graphic showing where that growth has been, on the left-hand side is over the decade, and the right-hand side is over the last 2 years. And the one on the left-hand side, we can see that concentrated growth along the Front Range. And like I said, it was both 95% of the total jobs as well as 95% of the total population. They go hand in hand. And that is an important, understanding, is that job growth really creates and drives a lot of the population growth. But interestingly, the last 2 years where we've seen this pretty big departure is that we did see kind of a hollowing out of the city center. So we saw total population decline in Denver, Boulder, Jefferson. Some of that has to do with other pieces like aging, but important to see that piece, important to see that total population decline along the Eastern Plains as well as in the Central Mountains. And that might surprise a lot of people because people thought, oh, everybody's flocking to the mountains. Well, they may have been flocking as visitors, but not necessarily as residents. Next slide. So when we look at total population change and the components, what are those drivers? Well, we've got 3 pieces: births, deaths, and net migration. Births minus deaths is known as natural increase. It's the blue component of this graphic. This chart starts in 1970. And one of the things that you'll see with that is that we peaked in natural increase in about 2007, and it's been slowing ever since. Slowing because we're seeing a slowdown in births and an increase in deaths, not just COVID deaths, just also because we're getting older. But on the net migration side, where you can really see in the red this business cycle that's in there, and the fact that we've seen net migration slowing basically since 2016, 2017. So pre-pandemic, we started to see population slowing down, and really that pretty big slowdown in the last 2 years. But again, you've seen this business cycle over time. Next slide. So what does it look like for the North Front Range? So if we break it up, and I'm focusing just on Larimer and Weld, we know that it also comes down into parts of Adams County, but I'm focusing on the total counties, and I know it doesn't include all of Larimer necessarily as well. Just, it makes it easier to do it this way. On Larimer's on the left-hand side, Weld is on the right-hand side, and same idea. So the natural increase is the blue component, orange is the net migration. We can see that both counties really driven by net migration. That's a big foundation of it. Not as much of the population is actually from the components of the natural increase component, the births and deaths. You can see on the right-hand side or the left-hand side with Larimer, you can see the same slowdown, both in net migration as well as natural increase. Oh, but alas, you don't necessarily see that on the Weld County side. It has held pretty steady with that natural increase and net migration with the Weld County. And that's really important to really understand. I think that Weld is going to be a little bit different. Next slide. Now I've talked about the slowdown in births, and that is really significant. We've seen a slowdown in births in the United States because, just birth rates have fallen over time. It started way back after the 70s, and it's continued to fall. In the United States, the total fertility rate for women is at 1.6. In Colorado, it's 1.5, and replacement is 2.1. So significantly below replacement level of births. That slowdown in births in the United States ended up in a 1 million person decline in the under 18 over the last decade. 27 states had an absolute decline in the under 18 population. For Colorado, we actually had an increase in the under 18 population of about 38,000. of the 744,000. So only 5% of the growth was in the under 18. In Colorado, that's what this map is showing. We saw 43 of the 64 counties had an absolute decline in that under 18 population. And it doesn't matter where you were, Eastern Plains, San Luis Valley, Western Slope, Denver Metro, we saw declines in the under 18 population. Weld County represented 43% of the total growth in the under 18 population, 16,000 of the 38,000.
Well, babies over here.
So this is really
Well, I think the
right.
last time I heard her do this presentation, Weld County actually ranked high in affordability for families, which is why I think that stat comes from that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you can also see that, there's a huge correlation with building housing, right? That's the reason why it's more affordable, because Weld kept up. So lots of
Elizabeth, I'm sorry, I'm unsure if I've seen this in your presentations or if I've seen this elsewhere. Can you comment? I believe that Weld County school districts are one of the few counties in the state that are actually experiencing an increase in enrollment. Have I seen that from your presentations?
I don't think it may have been. The point is the population in the under 18 continues to grow. So there would be no reason to see a decline in school enrollment. There would be continued growth because, again, you're continuing to see the growth in that under 18 population. And it's really one of the only counties in the state. We're also seeing growth in Larimer, not as fast, but it still hasn't seen a huge, like a big slowdown. The other county is El Paso, that you've seen continued growth in that under 18 population, but at slower rates, both Larimer and El Paso. But in Weld, it's stayed pretty solid. And I agree. I think it's has to do with housing that is more affordable, because typically that's what families want when they don't want apartments with kids. That's hard and noisy and too many kids too close. So it makes sense. It's something though to be aware of, is that you do see this growth in kiddos. So thinking about, everything from, new licenses as they age into the driver's license, more drivers are all going to be part of that mix that you will continue to see in Weld. Next slide. So if we then look at migration, that's what this chart is looking at, is migration rate by age. So it's done as a rate so you can compare the counties to the state equally. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. So this is a rate per 100. The blue is Colorado. So you can see Colorado's really bread and butter is that kind of 22 to 37. That purple one with the star is Larimer, and you can really see that very highly concentrated at the college age because of the university. Now we know that Weld also has a university, but we don't see that spike like you do for Larimer. What you see is, and Weld is that kind of reddish colored one, is a smidge older, but you also see a higher share of the kiddos. So not only migrating in families, but maybe also attracting families with children. So it's not just births that are creating that increase, it's also migration with children. So it easily could be, the family moves from Larimer to Weld, or from Adams to Weld, or Denver to Weld, or even out of state to Weld. But you can see that, as well as older age groups as well. So important to see. What I like to say is that Weld is pretty popular to most age groups. So that's something to be aware of as well. Next slide. And the biggest thing, and I mentioned this in the intro, is why do we see migration? And the most important thing to understand is that there is a huge correlation with job growth and net migration. When we see stronger job growth, which is the blue bars, we tend to see stronger net migration, which is the red line. When we see weaker job growth, we see weaker net migration. Now, it holds very strong, except in a place like Weld, where Weld also is a strong area for net migration for jobs in other counties as well. So if we go to the next slide and talk a little bit about the economy, I want to talk what's kind of driving the jobs. Next slide. If we look at the map, this is really looking at Q2 or Q3 2019, so pre-pandemic levels of employment compared to Q3 2022. So how many counties have made it back? Well, we know the state as a whole has come back in terms of total employment. We also know, though, within that, not every industry and not every county. Red, orange, yellow are the counties that are back to pre-COVID levels of employment. All of the shades of blue are not. So if you're following employment in Weld County, for example, we know that they're not back to pre-COVID levels of employment. A lot of that is the oil and gas jobs, but that really doesn't matter in terms of migration, because there are these other counties that Weld also helps support in terms of labor force. So we think the Denver metro area, we also know Larimer County as well. So if we look then on the right-hand side is showing job growth by the different counties in the Front Range that I wanted to kind of compare you guys to. And we have Weld there in the purple, and we have Larimer there in kind of, it's a funky green. Larimer's back to pre-COVID levels of employment. Weld is still below, but both counties really doing a lot of growth pre-COVID in terms of jobs. So you've got these factors for both Larimer and Weld drive.
Cut out and where to drop.
The most important part of the presentation.
No coincidence. Elizabeth, we lost you.
She's still there.
She's frozen.
She's frozen.
Her voice is gone.
Am I still there?
Now you're back. Yeah, you cut out. In fact, you dropped out right when you said drop.
Okay, so what did I say?
You said it's dropped in Weld County and Larimer County, but we're starting to see, then you're gone.
Okay, so I apologize about that. I'm sorry that I went away. So I guess the big point is you see this job growth in Larimer and Weld over time, and you can see, this is anchored to 2002. So strong job growth, some of the strongest job growth in the state. Yeah, sure, Weld's not back, but that doesn't really matter because Weld also feeds a labor force to a lot of other counties and the Denver metro area. So all things that you are well aware of, but knowing that Weld is, I don't want to say it in a pejorative way, it's really a bedroom county for a lot of counties. So not negative, but that means that there's going to be a lot of drivers, maybe less than what we've seen historically because of COVID and people aren't necessarily all going back into the office, but certainly you've got drivers. You've got transportation problems, not problems, you've got transportation issues that are going to be part of that.
Question on a data point as far as how they register it. We have seen the exponential growth from a residential standpoint in Weld County. I'm curious as to if somebody is commuting now 1 or 2 days a week down into the metro area where their job is that job still listed in the metro area even though the bulk of the work might be being done remotely in Weld? So I'm going to stump the state tomorrow.
She's hanging again.
If she's lagged up again.
Hey, are you guys, I'm sorry.
Now you're back.
Okay, I can hear you too, like you guys went away as well. So go with the question again.
My question is, I'm curious with, I'm a Weld County Commissioner, so therefore I'm in bedroom community, we're gonna work on that. But I am curious in the fact that when I talk to constituents, two things ring true in Weld County. One is the regulatory environment that surrounds oil and gas and the slowing of permits from COGCC dramatically impact employment in Weld County, it just does. Secondly, we hear a lot of, geez, I used to live in the metro area, couldn't afford to live down there anymore. My job remains in the metro area, but I'm living in Weld County now, and I only commute 1 or 2 days a week. So my question is, even if their job may be with a company that's in the metro area, the bulk of their work is being performed in Weld County, out of their spare bedroom or office in the basement. I'm just curious as to that, whether, from a recording standpoint, is that still accredited to the county in which it's created? Not necessarily the work performed.
Right, no, very good question. So jobs are recorded by place of establishment, and residents are counted by place of, where they reside. So if you've got a person that lives in Greeley but works for a company in Denver, that job shows up in Denver, not in Greeley.
That's the pandemic. Johnny would probably attest. That's something we've heard a lot of from constituents is, geez, we moved here because we don't have to be near our job all the time anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. You guys, as well as Douglas County, we see a lot of growth in both places, really driven by the fact that they don't have to show up in the office.
Thank you.
So next slide. So let's talk about housing and households real quick. Next slide. One of the biggest challenges I think with housing is that we continue to see this boom and bust cycle. The orange bars are new housing units. The black line is household formation. So basically think about new households. And one of the biggest things that we see is that housing and building and construction kind of goes through this boom bust cycle. A lot of it is outside of our own hands because it has to do with sometimes financing and other macro conditions. So, but it's a problem, right? It creates a challenge. When we stop building, which we did in Colorado, we were building more than 40, 50,000 units a year. We fall to fewer than 10,000. That creates a problem. That creates a real tight housing then, and prices escalate, and it's not great for a lot of folks when that happens. And then it's not great when we go through the bust cycle as well, because firms crumble, employees lose money, so it's not good. So there's got to be something that we do to improve that piece. But what it's done for Colorado is maybe worse than other places. It pushed us to having the 6th highest median home price, the 4th highest median rent, yet only the 10th highest median household income. So it basically makes it harder, for the lowest income side. And it's not a problem for the more wealthy people that come with money from, California and New York or Boston, but it does make it harder for the folks that have been here for years and maybe aren't making those same salaries. Next slide. If we look at yep.
When you look at this housing boom and bust cycle and the growth of housing and the things, when you guys look at this, maybe it's going to be a little bit farther down. Oh, maybe it is. Maybe I'll wait. But our supply versus our demand for housing.
Right. So I think. Say that again.
Not a lot of homes that are in Colorado. I mean, Greeley, I think we got about 100 homes on the market. We got 1,000 people looking for homes.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I think
Yes.
after
Poking the bear.
2008, people didn't keep up after the downturn, right? The 2008, the supply didn't keep up with the demand.
Right. So if go back one slide, and that's what you can.
This is state of Colorado, and if you noticed, Weld and Larimer are growing like crazy. And so this is averaged out, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
And so we're on the wrong side of this equation.
Big time.
Right.
I'm
I
sorry,
mean, definitely a supply demand problem where population has continued to grow, but we weren't building housing. The Great Recession was horrible. And Weld actually suffered pretty significantly. So did Larimer during the Great Recession because we were kind of overbuilding. I don't know if you remember just the number of homes going into foreclosure in 2009, 2010. It was pretty horrific. So it makes sense. We stopped building, then we continued to grow, but then you all probably are well aware it takes, probably 5 to 7 years to start a business cycle back up again and getting builders building, getting permits, getting all of those things done. So, we've always had this mismatch with supply and demand, and it's bad. Next slide. But we have started making up in terms of those permits. On the left-hand side is Colorado. The blue component is single family. The orange is multifamily. So we have started building or started permitting. We actually had one of our highest years ever in terms of building permits in 2001, higher than we even saw in the 90s, which is crazy to think about. And if you look at the left-hand side or the right-hand side, then we've got Larimer and Weld. Weld is in the blue, Larimer is in the orange. Same cycle. We stopped building significantly, and then starts back up again in terms of permits. And, any of you that are in business understand when you start and stop an entity, it really is not easy on a lot of folks. But at least what we're seeing right now is a lot more permitting going on. We'll start to catch up because we do see population starting to slow down. So on this end, we'll start to see supply increase, demand slow down, and that will hopefully start to put some downward pressure on price appreciation. Next slide. On top of all of this, we also have this aging thing where we're pretty young state and both counties are pretty young, but we're aging pretty fast. And that's having an impact, especially on the labor force. And that's what I want to mention right now. Next slide. These two graphs show the age distribution of both counties. Left-hand side Larimer, right-hand side Weld. A couple of things that you can see. You can actually see on that left-hand side with Larimer the slowdown in the births. So pretty significant slowdown. Weld or Larimer County probably will start to see a slowdown in the school age population this next decade, not last decade, but this decade. Weld, you can see maybe a smidge of a slowdown, but I was looking at this more recent data from this year, and actually there's a pick back up in the births in Weld, so maybe we'll only see a little bit of a trough. But the bigger issue is if we look at the black lines, that's at age 65. What we do see at the same time now is a lot of people aging into 65 plus, and what do they typically do? As they age into that 65 plus, they tend to retire. So if for the state as a whole, what we've seen is last decade about 500,000 people retired. This decade, we're expecting about 400,000 people to retire. And we don't necessarily see a net out-migration of the older adults. So compounding the challenges that we've got filling new jobs is we're also going to have a challenge filling old jobs. So pretend I'm going to age into retirement this decade. I'm not going anywhere. The next state demographer is not living in my house. So I'm going to be constraining supply because I'm not going to make this house available. And my job is not a new job. I'm an old job. So on top of any new job growth that you see in Larimer and Weld, you've also got old job growth caused by retirement. And again, this is going to hit both counties, but especially Weld, for anybody that might be living in Weld, yet they hold jobs in other places. So it won't show up as a cause from a new job. It just tends to be from retirement. So think about this compounding issue. So next slide. If we then look at kind of the forecast over the next decade, the top is Larimer, the bottom is Weld. We're forecasting about 50,000 in growth in Larimer County, but if you look by age, almost 50% of the growth in Larimer County is actually forecast in the 65 plus. So it's not actually forecast by necessarily people moving in that are young, like that typical migrant. It's actually that older adult, and it really could be not necessarily from migration, but really just by celebrating birthdays. On the Weld County side, however, we're forecasting about 95,000 in growth this decade. So about 9,500 a year, which this last year you met that and superseded it. But only about 25% of the growth is in the 65 plus, where really the majority of the growth is in that working age population. So different kind of scenario for both counties. Next slide. So I guess the biggest point with aging is to really be aware in terms of percentage change. We really see the fastest growth in that 65 plus and slower in the younger ages, except for maybe Weld. Weld has got a little bit more balance and more growth at that younger end, but still 25% of your growth in the 65 plus is pretty significant and fairly new. So Weld is going to see it at both ends, at the young end and the older end, where Larimer is going to see it primarily at that older end, but still in that kind of school age population. So kind of a word of warning is that you're going to see actually a lot more older adults on the road, as well as getting driver's licenses. So that could be a lot of fun. Labor force. Labor force, you're going to see a lot of commuting still, but hopefully somewhat downplayed with COVID and the fact that more people are doing the remote. So they're only doing it 2 days a week instead of 5 days a week. Really thinking about it in terms of housing and households, that a lot of the growth you're going to need for new people coming in, like think about my scenario, people retiring but aging in place, people create community. And so thinking that they're going to leave is not likely. They're probably going to age in place because that's what traditionally older adults do. And then we've got millennials coming into home buying and second home buying. So think more in Larimer County, be aware of your second home ownership, especially on the mountainside. How that, and I know that's probably not part of the MPO, but still impacting the county as a whole and impacting commuting patterns and driving patterns. Gen Z aging into rentership and home ownership. So just be aware that this big issues, big changes coming forward. Next slide. So what are we forecasting for the counties? Next slide. Really, it's this idea behind things is that we've got both two models that we run. One is an economic model. We really are looking at jobs and what are the jobs that are forecast to grow in your region. And then on the other side, on the right-hand side, we've got the demographic components. We look at your current population, age people through time, applied birth rates and death rates. And so that population side is our labor supply, the job side is our labor demand, and then where there's not equilibrium, we end up bringing in net migration to fill that. Next slide. So I've said it now probably a gazillion times. Just keep an eye on job growth. Job growth really does equal population growth. And so when people come in and say, yeah, no, we're going to cut, we're not going to build homes anymore, but we're going to build, we're going to allow more commercial and industrial growth. Doesn't make a lot of sense. right? Because a job is a person and a housing unit is where that job sleeps at night. So it's having to look at all of those bundled together. We are seeing a slowdown in growth, but it's not going to impact especially Weld County as much, but it is going to slow things really for the state as a whole. But North Front Range, even in that scenario, is forecast to be our fastest growing region in terms of percentage change in the state. As well as fastest growth is in our 65 plus. And what is that 65 plus growth going to do? It's going to drive more growth due to retirement and needing people to fill positions. And housing is going to be key in all of that, and understanding how do we create this balance, right, between housing, job, labor force, people, retirements. Next slide. So if we look at all of that, if you look at the bar chart on the right-hand side, these are the forecasts over the next decades. So in this last decade, between 2010 and 2020, we saw about 60,000 in Larimer, about 80,000 almost in Weld, slowing for Larimer for the next 2 decades, and then even more so in the following, between 2040 and 2050. In Weld, we actually see it picking up over the next several decades, and then slowing down in that out decade between 2040 and 2050 in terms of that total change. For the North Front Range as a whole, forecast to increase by about 415,000 between 2020 and 2050, so over these 30 years. For the state as a whole, increasing by about 1.7 million. It's actually going to be a little bit closer to 1.6. Within that, about 95% forecast in the Front Range as a whole, with very little growth and some declines in the San Luis Valley, Eastern Plains, northwest part of the state. Next slide. Lots of uncertainties in that. And, all of those, the top 4 there are probably equally weighted. Uncertainty in terms of international migration. We've seen some impacts since December at the border. We don't know what the national policymakers are going to do in terms of international migration. With so many states actually losing population, they could change policies to allow more international, so that other states, we're doing pretty well filling labor force compared to some other states that are not doing so well. But I think water, beyond a doubt, is probably going to be the number one factor, and could be our number one constraint. And certainly for the North Front Range, could easily be a constraint. We typically, when we're doing our forecast, we talk to counties and we ask about water, and we ask, is water a constraint? And to date, we're still not getting a water constraint that is within our forecast horizon for either county, but we're always open to listen, and we'll obviously take that into account. Housing, boom bust cycles, all of those others listed there are also factors. So any other questions that you guys might have?
I just have a question. So, thinking about like Europe and Japan, who've already experienced some of this slowdown in growth and, slower birth rates, are there lessons to be learned? Like, I guess I'm curious, like what they learned as they experienced the same thing. And clearly you're right, older drivers on the road, more need maybe for transit and stuff like that. But are there things that we can learn from with how they've had to adapt in those kind of similar situations?
Right. No, I think it's a really good question. And so they definitely saw a significant slowdown in economic growth. And that is going to be this other side, is as we slow down, we will start to see a slowdown in economic growth. And we have to be okay with that. They have a very low tolerance for any international migration. What they are pushing in Japan, for example, is actually more family-friendly policies. So a lot of places are providing you a free house if you get married and have kids. So they're trying to push growth from a fertility side. They're covering, maternity leave completely. They're making it easier to work and have a family. They're not necessarily changing any of their international migration policies. Canada, on the other hand, had started to see this slow down, and they've actually increased their international migration policies as well as family-friendly policies. So easier for daycare, healthcare, maternity, paternity leave, but they're also being very strategic in their international migration policies. So you can see, what I always say is I don't know if there's a best answer. I say that there's situations and then consequences. You can have a lot of population growth and continue this economic growth, but at the detriment to maybe water supplies, the environment, congestion. But if you completely slow it down, then you've got constraints in terms of economic growth. And maybe like right now, there's super tight labor force. Maybe you won't see people filling positions for not just regular jobs, but what about for city jobs or for regional jobs? What about daycare workers, healthcare workers? We will have to then find options on that other side if we're constrained. So I think it's just this question of how do we balance?
Additional questions for Ms. Garner? This aging, angry baby boomer thanks you. Now the old man will shake his fist at the cloud. Thanks, Elizabeth. As always, I enjoy your presentation.
Thank you.
Okay, we've got all that going for us, which is nice. We are on to presentations number 12, North Front Range NPO Models presentation. For her final time at the
You know what,
So quickly.
say anything you want to say, just get it up all your chest.
Actually, I have a few more items laid on this agenda too,
Okay.
so apologies. But what we wanted to do tonight is give an overview of the two models that the North Range NPO maintains. We've been working on these for the last year and a half, and are wrapping up efforts on them now to inform the regional transportation plan that you all are scheduled to adopt in September. And on the call, we do have the consultant who worked mostly on the travel model, so if there are more technical questions, Sean McAtee from Cambridge Systematics is online and can jump in to answer. So first we're going to talk about the land use model, and we'll talk about the travel demand model. Because we have so much on tonight's agenda, what I'm planning to do is just go through to the end and see if there are questions, but it's up to you, Chair, if you want to stop in between there. So the purpose of our land use model is to forecast the location of people and jobs. So I'm very glad we just heard from Elizabeth Garner to give that great overview, because we do use the State Demography Office's projections to set our control totals for our land use model. And then our travel demand model takes those outputs from the land use model, along with other information, to forecast our travel patterns out into the future. Every time we update these models, we extend out to the next horizon year that we're looking at. So for this next RTP, we're going out to 2050. And these models get used for other purposes too, for projects, for local transportation plans. It's not just for use by the North Range NPO. We do get data requests all the time. So as I said, we update these to inform the RTP. We do major updates every 4 years, which is our cycle for updating the RTP. And then we convene a model steering team to help guide this process. So we invite the land use planners and transportation planners from our member agencies to review the model inputs and outputs to ensure that they are reasonable. The base year for this set of model updates is 2019. And you can see here our model area outlined in blue. It covers most of Wells, a lot of Larimer. It extends beyond the North Front Range NPO boundary because we do that ozone conformity assessment for the entire northern sub-area of the ozone non-attainment area. On this map, you see the jobs and population in 2019. So that's our base year data set we're working from. And we are expecting a lot of growth, as we heard from Elizabeth. So for that entire modeling area, it's a 60% increase from 2020 out to 2050. And we need to determine through the land use model where all these additional people and jobs are going to locate within our model area. We do that with an urban SIN location choice model. This is a model that's used by a lot of NPOs across the country, and they calibrate it specifically to each region, looking at development patterns from the early 2010s, and they calibrate the parameters for the model for that region. On top of that calibrated model, there are 4 sets of inputs that we gather to better inform the forecast. So we've talked about this, the control totals, which are from the State Demography Office, that determine the total number of people, households, and jobs that are expected in the region. Then we look at each census block. We pull the land use plans, and in some cases the zoning code for all of the communities in the modeling area, and use that to determine what's the highest number of households and jobs that could fit into each census block. So there's a bit of translation there from the land use speak to this model speak of what's the highest number that could fit into each block. And the model then respects that. The third item is we ask what developments have happened recently or are anticipated, and then we can plug those into the model, and it will fill those with households and jobs. And then we know that there are other factors that are going to influence development that aren't being directly captured through these inputs, that often take more of that expert view to determine if these results are reasonable or not. So we know things like slope of the land, floodplains, whether redevelopment of an area is likely. Those are all things that aren't directly captured that we need our model steering team members to review these results and let us know where results are reasonable or unreasonable, and we can make those adjustments. So this is another way of seeing those 4 inputs being fed into that calibrated location choice model. And then the output then is the population and jobs in each census block for our forecast years. Our model steering team has been meeting for the last year and a half or so. They helped us develop the inputs, and then they provided review of the outputs. In March, they reviewed a 2050 land use run and provided comments back that we've addressed, and they provided another round of edits in May that we are in the process of implementing. And this is the current draft results that we have for our forecasted population. The light blue dots are population in 2019, and the dark blue dots show the growth from 2019 up to 2015. So a lot of growth in the center of the region and the outskirts of our communities. Same type of map for jobs, with light green showing the jobs in 2019, dark green showing the jobs added by 2050. We'll have more, as I said, we're still finalizing these land use forecasts. And so there's going to be community level summaries that will be available in the RTP. But we just wanted to bring high level review of what is in our land use model and how that works. So with that, we're going to jump to the travel demand model. We have a 4-step travel demand model. If you've heard the lingo, there are 2 main types of models, a 4-step model, an activity-based model is the other kind. Activity-based models take more inputs to develop, and they mostly answer the same kinds of questions, these 2 types of models, but activity-based models can answer a few additional questions and consider trip chaining as part of when you're looking at the trips that people are making. Whereas in a 4-step model, each trip is considered sort of independently in the model. There are 4 key questions that are answered in the 4-step model. The first is how many trips are generated, where are those trips going to go, what mode will be taken, and what route will be used for those vehicle and transit trips. So our model does look at all modes, non-motorized modes as well. Those just simply aren't assigned to the network, but we do have a mode shared that is estimated by our travel model. And then we can use those outputs to see what is the expected volume on each roadway segment and what is the expected speed and how much congestion will be occurring in the different time periods in our forecast years. As part of the greenhouse gas rule that TC adopted in 2021, there were a set of modeling standards that were established. And TC recognized that this would be a lift for the MPOs to meet these standards, and they awarded $250,000 of the state's MMOF funds to the North Front Region MPO to enhance our model to better meet these standards. And so that was awarded last summer. We expanded the scope of our contract with Cambridge to address these model enhancements. And so this is a summary of this work on this slide. We are looking at person-level demand instead of looking at a household. So it's a more fine-tuned assessment of the travel patterns of the population within our region, considering age, person type, auto ownership, and income, whereas our previous land use model just looked at household characteristics and didn't have information at the person level. And again, this one thing to clarify, this is all synthetic data. We don't have actual data on the individuals in our region, but we have synthesized population data. Mobile device data was used for the first time for our model. Data from cell phones about trip making behavior, again, anonymized, but that provided up-to-date travel patterns that we could then use to inform the model. Work from home was enhanced. We had assumptions, pretty basic assumptions about work from home in our previous model, which we knew we needed to flesh out and be able to adjust those and have work from home really better integrated into the way the travel model was looking at trip making behavior. And lastly, induced demand, which is a complicated topic. So the next few slides are going to go through the different elements of induced demand and talk about how that looks in our model. But the key thing here is the consideration of accessibility. Our previous travel model did consider many elements of induced demand, but it did not have this consideration of accessibility. So that was something that was added through this model enhancements. So, induced demand. Defined as the increase in the overall amount of travel, such as person miles traveled or vehicle miles traveled, in response to improvements in transportation capacity or level of service. There are 5 main ways that induced demand can work. That's by shifting the route, shifting the mode, shifting the destination, adding additional trips, or new development that is spurred as a result of these changes in transportation capacity. And for 3 of these, they are included in the model. They have been included in past models. For one of them, it's somewhat included through this research that our consultant has conducted. And the last one is not included, which I will explain as we go through each of these slides for each of these elements. And I do want to say there is also a 6th element, which I am forgetting. Let's see if I have it here. Oh, shift in time of day. Shift in time of day can also result from changes in capacity. That doesn't have a substantial impact on person miles traveled or vehicle miles traveled, which is why I've left it out of this presentation. That is a 6th element of induced demand. Okay, so route shifts. This is when travelers choose a different route and it changes the volumes on a particular facility, but it has a very little impact on overall regional EMT, which is what we really care about when we're talking about this from our regional perspective. So in this example, someone from Greeley wants to travel to Fort Collins, and they are going on 85 and 14. And then I-25 gets improved, and it's easier to get that way to Fort Collins, and so they change their route. So that's what route shift looks like. And as I said, it has very minimal impact usually on VMT. The model does account for this because it's looking at the congested travel times for the different routes and choosing what makes the most sense for those trips. Mode shifts. This is when a traveler chooses a different mode. And this changes overall VMT, but does not significantly change your person miles traveled because the person's still traveling. In this case, someone is traveling by bus from Greeley to Fort Collins, and after some improvements to I-25, they may choose to drive in their personal vehicle instead, increasing VMT. Destination shifts. This is when a traveler chooses to visit a different destination or chooses to live further or closer to their frequent destinations. So in this example, someone is traveling to Loveland because although they want to travel to Fort Collins, it's just too difficult to get there. And so perhaps they do their shopping in Loveland instead of going to Fort Collins. But after the improvement, they make that trip to Fort Collins, adding some additional VMT. And this is captured in our travel demand model. Additional trips. This is when a traveler chooses to make a trip they would otherwise forgo, which is pretty challenging to find in the data. Our consultant looked at the accessibility of destinations and how that influenced whether travelers were making additional trips and found very limited evidence that that was occurring in the region. But in this case, someone would make additional trips if the facility was improved versus fewer trips if it wasn't. And lastly, new development. This is an example where development may locate in different places because of that added capacity. The model does not capture this. This is pretty tricky to do because each model needs to be calibrated, and the way to reflect this in your modeling is to have the models speak to each other. So you run an interim year, you feed it into the travel model, you feed those results back into the land use model, and that way you can get the integration, but then it's very difficult to calibrate those models. So that is the barrier in addressing this element of induced demand. So as a summary, our model captures 3 of these 5 elements. Sorry, it now captures 4. It did capture 3. But as I said, the research conducted by our consultant showed very limited impact of accessibility to destinations on the number of trips generated. So one last concept on this, a term you may hear is elasticity of demand. This provides an assessment of how much of change is happening across all these types of induced demand. It's calculated by looking at the percent change in VMT divided by the percent change in lane miles. And we're looking at it from a regional perspective. So not on a particular facility, but across the whole region. If you change the lane miles by a certain percent, what's the change in VMT? The literature is very vast, or very, there's a wide range that's shown in the literature from a 0.1 elasticity up to 0.9. Through the enhancements that we have in our model is now showing somewhere in the range of 0.1 to 0.2, which will vary based on the projects that are being represented in the scenarios, the location of those projects. This is not just one set number. This is, it's somewhere in there. When we do a test, we'll get a number, probably somewhere in that range, although it could go beyond that range as well. The scenario that we wanted to share that we ran was adding a general purpose lane to I-25. It adds 62 lane miles to the region. So that is a 1% increase in the number of lane miles across the region. The output that we saw was a 0.1% increase in regional VMT, just 30,000 increase. So you divide that out, and that's an elasticity of 0.1. So there is so much more we could say about both the land use model and the travel demand model, but we wanted to give that high-level summary of what is in there, how they were developed, the major changes to those models. So with that, I will turn it back to the chair to see if there are any questions.
None that I'm smart enough to ask. Questions, Frank?
Sure. I like the model. It's helpful for trying to make predictions. But have we actually trying to drive this to something more concrete? And by that I mean, we know which cars are registered in Larimer and Weld County. Look those up. We know how much fuel is sold in Larimer and Weld County. There's a tax on a gallon of gas, tax on a diesel, and those numbers could be added up. All that fuel is turned into gas. If that gas is burned, we know the vehicle is involved, we know how much miles they're burning. And so that kind of concretely gives you a more accurate how many miles are being driven in Weld and Larimer County. Just as a guess. And if you could accurately put it to a gas station, you could also get a general target where people are. But I'm just curious if you took something like that, which is some concrete data, and use that to reference your model, if that would help in some ways to take some of the guesswork or trying to tune the model to actual air quality.
Yes. Maybe Sean can speak to this as well, but the air emissions aspect of the modeling does have this other set of inputs that CDPHE, the Colorado Department of Health and Environment, runs the MOVES 3 model from EPA. They actually take our travel model outputs, the volumes and the speeds by time of day, and add other inputs such as vehicle classification counts and a whole set of other inputs vehicle age, because the vehicle age will influence how efficient those vehicles are in using the gasoline and how much emissions are coming out. So I think some of the inputs you described do get used in that air emissions modeling. On the travel model side, one thing I did not speak to at all was the validation process of the model, which is we gather all of the traffic counts from communities over a 5-year time period and use those to validate what the model is saying for the base year of 2019. And so that probably is the closest to seeing what is the volume happening on these roads, the roads where we have the counts, and then we can extrapolate and see other similar facilities to make sure our model is representing the travel that's occurring as best as it can. Sean, would you like to add anything or clarify?
Sure, yeah. Madura, I think you did a good job of explaining, kind of the basic validation process. Similar in concept to the example of knowing how many vehicles are in the county, how much gas is sold. We take a different approach to get a concrete value for the base year. We look at an extensive set of traffic counts, so those tube counters you see on the road, the permanent counters that CDOT has. We use this location-based services data or mobile device data to understand how far people are traveling, so we get a good sense of not just how much VMT is happening, but where it's happening. We use information like transit boarding data so that we're also capturing that transit travel. We look at non-motorized travel to the extent possible. And we also have a household travel survey that helps us better understand why people are traveling. So we take all of that information together and we're able to get a very solid, good understanding of what's on the ground today. We then calibrate the model to match that existing condition that we have, where we have a good data set.
I wasn't actually complaining about the modeling because I think that's a necessary element. I was just suggesting looking at the gas sold and just going, is that the gas sold will be turned to gas, and is that what the model is going out of the cars?
Yeah, and that's not a method I've heard used, but I actually find that kind of like a fascinating way that we might want to look into doing things in the future as another data point we could potentially use.
Please.
Yeah. So first of all, I'm glad that the 250,000 from TC has been helpful in the modeling part, because that is really important, is making sure that with the new rules that the resources were created to help support the techniques that were out there, so not that that's helpful. My question has to do with the modeling area that you showed at the beginning, and recognizing there's the north area and then the south area. But at least what I see, and because I live it, is there's a lot of travel happening between Larimer and Weld County and the Denver metro area for job access, for healthcare, for whatever. So how does your model and the DRCOG model and the CDOT model, how do they all talk to each other?
What we do is we coordinate with CDOT and DRCOG on traffic counts where the model areas actually overlap a little between North Range and DRCOG. Their model comes up to kind of 38, which is other percentage of North Range NPO. We go further south to State Highway 66 just to get a better representation of what's going on in our region. So we do coordinate on assumptions of growth along those major corridors across the region. On land use, CDOT uses our land use forecast because the state does not maintain a land use model. And so the model that we've developed for our region is much better than what they could come up with. So they actually take our land use and put that directly into the statewide model. They also take our networks. And I do think the land use element is always something we need to have a close eye on because our land use model doesn't see the Denver region and doesn't really get that that is a draw that more households would want to locate in the southern region to access the Denver metro. And so that's something we need to go and adjust because the model is just not natively recognizing that because it's closed and not seen in that other area.
Right, thank you for explaining, because that's my concern, because that's the same answer I got when I asked in the DRCOG area. So there's these two closed circles. I called it like in the metro area, it's like the flat earth, right? It's like nothing exists beyond the metro area. It's like, hello, people, like there's a whole lot of northern Colorado out here. And so
I've been saying that for you.
Right, so it's really worrisome to me because this body is making decisions about this circle of influence, and then the metro area is making, and yet there are a lot of what I would call customers that are trying to travel back and forth. And so it helps to hear that there's work being done in that space because those are the trips we're missing. And yet listening to the demographer's presentation, that's where our growth is occurring. And I loved her comment about the house is where the job sleeps at night. And so, I mean, that's really important. So I appreciate the work you're doing. And I guess the more that can be done to look at that integration, I think about how is CDOT using your model to forecast Mustang ridership? And how is that used to size service planning for interregional transit? So I appreciate the work and you explaining how it all works, but it just raises those questions for me. And then my last question is, how is the model used to create scenarios going forward? Because it looks like from the induced demand one, that example of I-25, it's generating VMT, and yet we know our larger goals around trying to reduce VMT, or at least reduce emissions associated. So are these models used to create those scenarios, is my question.
Yeah, that's a really good point on the scenarios because one thing we also tested was building out the network as we are envisioning it, which we'll get to later in this agenda. And the impacts vary, as I said on this slide. So what is the impact of one project versus another project versus a set of projects? It varies. And so just because in isolation, this project reduces VMT, that may not be true when you add it with our transit investments and our other roadway investments. So the collective is different than the sum of parts, which can be really tricky, but that is also the benefit of the travel model because we are always faced with a wide array of options, where to live, where to travel, and that's what it is capturing.
But this shows if you had nothing, if you did nothing, you didn't have any more trails, you didn't put any more transit in, you're still only seeing a 0.1% increase for VMT.
Mm-hmm.
It's minuscule.
Now you add some of these other components, that 0.1 changes drastically, potentially.
It could go higher or lower.
But you hope to put transit in, it goes down.
Right, that's why I guess I'm just trying to understand how it pairs together the strategies to achieve the outcome, and how do you do that scenario building to look at the combination effect?
Well, and one of the, and to sort of tag on to Commissioner's discussion is, when you run a model, the model's only as good as the assumptions and the inputs you put into it.
Right.
And you can't ever predict. One of the things that I think California or any other state that's tried to predict human behavior, it's failed drastically. We can't predict human behavior. We can only predict what we know today and what we're assuming in a model that's going to predict a future outcome. It's not going to give you, so building scenarios and building strategic plans around it is only as good as what the data and the assumptions are. So predicting human behavior is difficult. It is very difficult. And I think the mobile devices, the mobile things that they're using, origin, destination, when time of day they travel in. I mean, she just gave us a report last month that we have no congested areas but one in the entire region, according to the congestion index model. Am I wrong? So it doesn't seem like we got a congestion problem according to the model, right? So that's why models are so difficult. And you're doing a great job, because models are not easy to do, and you put a lot of data. But we got to understand, a model is only as good as the assumptions from the data that's put in and the human behavior you can't predict.
And to add a little more to the scenario conversation, the RTP, what the plan is, we'll have several scenarios included and analyzed in the document, including an unconstrained scenario where we look at all the projects that communities have identified as a need. What does that do to our system? And no build scenario, we don't do anything. How does that impact travel patterns? And then also a high density land use. So as I talked about in the beginning, we have this forecast of what we think is a reasonable potential for our land use. And what we can do is change the dials to increase the ability for households to locate in dense urban areas, and see if the model puts additional people there, and then feed that into the land use model. We did something similar for the 2045 RTP, and it made a very substantial impact on the travel patterns with more people in dense locations. So we'll do something similar for this model effort too.
Okay, thank you. I think it would be interesting to see, because that is the driver, so to speak, is where are those jobs sleeping at night? It's not just how many, but where, and are they concentrated and co-located along efficient transportation corridors, or is it just more in different locations? So what is that relationship? Thanks for doing the work.
Additional questions from Dora. Do you have SimCity on your phone? And if so, how big is your city? Thank you, Medora. Keeping in mind that we're 55 minutes behind our schedule, let's move on to consent agenda number 13. It's 2023 congestion management process. Alex, please.
I will do my best to keep this very quick. So we identified an issue in the CMP that was brought forward. So this is an action item, not a consent item, just to clarify that. The issue is that when we looked at crash data, we considered all of Blair and Gulf counties, not just the NPO boundary. So we reduced the number of crashes. And so we just changed a graph is the major change. So
That's what down.
So in the consent, or sorry, in the council handouts that were sent out yesterday, we included a link to the updated CMP. And so we also included all of the changes that TAC and council recommended at their June meeting. And so, all right. May was time. And so we are looking for approval of the resolution as included in the council.
On the approval of the consent agenda?
Second.
A motion and second to approve the consent agenda. Further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign.
Thank you.
Motion carries. Thanks, Alex. Okay. Where are we at? Number 14, action items. Under action items, May 2023 TIP amendment process, or amendment. This is resolution number 2023-11 on page 17. And Rose, please.
Page 17. All right. The May 2023 amendment to the fiscal years 2023 to 2026 TIP includes 8 revision requests. This includes one revision from CDOT Region 4, which is adding $137,857,000 of TIFIA loan in fiscal year 2024 to the I-25 Segment 5 project. Revising 2 Greeley projects for the funding exchange that was discussed by Planning Council a couple months ago. So this is removing federal funding from the 10th Street Access Control Implementation Project and reallocating that to the 83rd Avenue Roadway Improvements Project. The 10th Street project was completed with all local funding. Adding additional funding to the RAC's Regional Ozone Planning and Modeling Analysis, which was discussed last month. And that is 25,000 STBG and 5,000 local in each year, fiscal year 2024 and 2025. And then also incorporating the Greeley program of projects for their 5307 FTA funds. And this is adding $2,047,000 to their operating assistance project, adding $646,000 to the ADA operations project, decreasing by $23,000 the preventative maintenance project, and adding 1 new project, which is the GET capital projects with 2.5 million FTA and local funds. The 30-day public comment period for this amendment began on May 10th and will conclude on June 8th, contingent on no negative public comments being received before the end of the public comment period. The TAC discussed and recommended approval of the TIP amendment at their meeting in May.
Questions for Anna Rose, please? If not, the actual resolution's on page 24, please.
Anna Rose, this is just a clarification. I'm looking at the resolution. I do not see the RAC item on the resolution itself.
That is a good catch, and so I can add that before it's signed, if that is an option.
Okay.
Do we need to include that in the motion?
Yeah, probably.
Likely need to amend the resolution to include the RAC item. Give that a go there, Mayor.
Oh, boy. I move to approve resolution number 20. Am I on the right one here? No.
Page 24, 23-11.
Where we're going on, sorry. I move to approve resolution number 2023-11 with the addition of the RAC TIF amendment. There we go.
I'll second.
Motion and second to do what the mayor said. I think the intent is expressed. Further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. All right, Anna Rose, let me get back to my. We are now on number 15, is that correct? Yep. 2015 RTP goals, objectives, performance measures, and targets. Jerome, good evening, sir.
Good evening. So at the April council meeting, just as a reminder, council did approve the 2050 RTP goals, of course, other objectives and targets. But at the May council meeting, NPO staff did receive feedback on adding a safety goal. So based off of council feedback, we have done that. So the only proposed change that we have towards our GOPMT is adding the safety goal with the corresponding objective of reducing the number of road-related fatalities and serious injuries within the region. And I'll keep that short and sweet.
That is a good career move, sir.
That is true. Medora took quite the length of time there. She's on her way out.
She's on her way out. Yeah.
If I remember right, we didn't add safety, we moved it up to the top, right?
So prior to the safety was not its own goal, it was housed within the mobility goal.
Okay.
So we did pull it out as its own.
Yeah, I thought that was a good change.
I will also note that there is not a corresponding resolution, and it will be approved with the resolution that adopts the 2050 RDP.
Okay.
RTP.
So this is part of what's next then. Okay, very good.
So council needs to approve this, just by, not by a resolution, just by saying, yes, you agree.
Yes, we agree.
Consent agenda.
Thank you.
Somebody do a motion. I'm sorry, I'm picky about that stuff. Proper motion would be to move to approve the RTP goals and objectives as stated on page 26 of our packet.
So
Motion and second to do that. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thanks, John.
good job.
Okay. Well, and it was pointed out that we did move, that I did move Herman up. So yeah, we'll catch up on the backside.
Yeah.
Okay. We blame Herman
I'll
for everything.
extend.
All right, the discussion item 16 is the 2023 call for projects. That's on page 27 of your packet. Anna Rose, please.
Thank you. At the last council meeting, we went through an exercise for prioritizing said goals as it would relate to the scoring criteria for the 2023 call for projects. So just as a reminder, we have 4 funding programs that we'll be awarding in about $22 million. So as we went through the process of taking the goals from council and looking at the scoring criteria for the call for projects, we did pull out that safety, the safety goal to create its own category. And so that'll be reflected in the scoring criteria that we are showing. And so what I would like to discuss with council this evening is the draft goals and proposed weighting, the scoring criteria matrix that we have created based on a few different factors that we took into consideration when building out this scoring criteria. So following the council discussion last month, we had a workshop with the TAC to look at all of the scoring criteria and how we can calculate that, and made some adjustments to each of these categories based on some technicalities. A few of the things that were taken into consideration when creating this matrix were the prioritization that council went through, but then also looking at the requirements for each of the funding programs, the intent of each of the funding programs, looking at the previous scoring criteria and how to incorporate that into this new scoring criteria. Took all of that information to create this matrix here. One of the things that we didn't discuss last month was that last line there, which is the discretionary points. During previous calls for projects, the TAC had expressed an interest for creating a more objective scoring criteria that's a lot more data-based, but then also there is something to be said about local knowledge of projects and kind of more of that subjectivity of if a project is a good project or if it might not be a project that fits that funding program. So that's why we had created this discretionary points so that when people are, when the scoring committee members are submitting their scores for each of these projects, they have kind of a little bit of wiggle room to be able to incorporate some of the things that are not exactly captured with the data. So I do want to pause there to see if there was any initial reaction to this proposed weighting of the scoring criteria.
Comments? I'm good.
And so I am not going to go into a lot of detail about each of these different criteria and the calculations, but I am happy to discuss based on if there's anything specific that council would like to discuss. But wanted to bring this as a topic of discussion with council to make sure that as we continue with this process and as we look to opening this call in August, that we are in agreement on what this scoring criteria will be. So I will open it up for any questions on any of the scoring criteria, but really just wanted to ensure the reasonableness of this matrix with council.
So Anna, the way we read this in the packet is that you have 1, 2, 3, 4 slides and you're reading them all down like a column, correct?
Yeah. And so so like on the blue, that's for CMAQ and carbon reduction. The green is for the TA program, transportation alternatives, and the purple is for the STVG program. So there's different scoring criteria for all 3 of these programs.
Please.
So under the the regional health, I guess it is, with the scoring on equity, it's a bigger percentage in TA and STVG than it is in the CMAQ. Is that why is that? Sorry, it took a while to get it out.
Right. It's mostly related to the fact that the majority of the regional health points are going towards the air quality emissions, in fact. So then breaking out the rest of the points based on that.
Additional comments, questions?
Well, just one more question. So is this all up to us, or are there federal or state and federal kind of guidelines for some of this too that we're also kind of incorporating into the matrix?
Yes. So the main federal guidance that we're incorporating is for for CMAQ and carbon reduction, requiring that they show emissions benefits.
Sure.
For TA and SVG and actually carbon reduction. There is a specification that you have to have equity incorporations into the scoring criteria. Those are really the federal requirements for scoring these projects. The rest of that is based on the priorities of the region.
Okay, thank you.
Additional comments, questions?
I will also mention, safety is one of the other considerations that is maybe not exactly required from the federal government, but very strongly recommended.
So John, do you have something?
Oh, no.
No? Okay.
I'm thinking of you.
Wow. Quite a declaration. I feel pretty.
One last thing that I just want to point out is that there was a criteria that we had removed from operations. We had originally proposed the leveraging funding sources to be, a benefit to different projects. With discussion with the TAC, they recommended removing that and increasing just the operational improvements because they saw greater benefit of more of the immediate impact of operational improvements rather than leveraging funding sources.
Okay. So the action is staff requests planning council review and be prepared to discuss the draft 2023 call for project scoring criteria matrix we've discussed. Is there an approval needed by us? And that would probably be next meeting?
Not the next meeting. The call for projects guidebook will be approved at the August meeting. So we will bring it again, other parts of the call for projects next month. But as long as we get the head nod this month, we will proceed with that scoring criteria.
What will be the projected deadline?
For the call for projects closing is October 6th, so it's open for about 2 months. And final approval of the projects is scheduled for January.
Everybody good with it? Good with it? Got the head nod. Thanks. Okay, back up to 15. Number 17 is the NFRMPO priorities list. This is on page 36. Is
there any way to make that bigger? Please?
Make it bigger.
Make it bigger. I know.
I'm farsighted, I've been having trouble.
Well, it's a lot of information to pass through.
I reviewed it earlier today, but I meant for the betterment of everybody.
Yes, so following discussion at the May council meeting, a matrix of the tier 1 roadway projects with TC's criteria was created, which is what you're partially seeing right now. And the projects have been grouped by corridor, as was mentioned at the May meeting. You will notice that the US 3485 project has been removed because that project is actually funded on the 10-year list. It's under a furnished funding, but it is on our list, but it has been funded, so it has been removed from this list. This was presented to TAC at their meeting in May as well, and they had one recommendation, which was to add project descriptions, because there was some confusion between some similar locating projects, so that was added in. So just as a reminder, this is a list of projects solely for CDOT's 10-year list of projects and their 10-year funding, which again is first eligible for any projects to go in for new projects in FY31. So this is many years out. This is at least 8 years out. So just keeping that in mind. Nothing that is on this list, not on this list, that doesn't preclude project sponsors from going forward and requesting funds from state sources or from federal sources. This is solely for the CDOT 10-year list, just as a reminder. So as you can see, the projects, I'm going to scroll over here. So you can see which projects meet the various criteria. That's on the next slide, but I'm afraid that would mess up the Zoom. So I'm not going to go to the next slide, but it is in your packet. So this list will be included by reference in the 2050 RTP, so no action is needed from council in regard to approving this. This will be, as I said, approved by reference into the 2050 RTP, and it is being approved by reference so that if anything does happen, money falls from the sky, priorities change, anything like that, we can make changes to this list without having to amend it.
Okay. Questions, John?
So I look at County Road 17, interoperational safety improvements, I think it's right there, yep. And it's not, because there will be asset and there will be is it not a strategic nature?
Not based on what the project description and not based on what strategic nature, how it is defined here, based on the project description that I have.
Okay. Questions? Commissioner Bradley?
Yeah, I think the earlier version we saw had dollar amounts, and I'm just not seeing them, and I don't know if it's, do we have the dollar amounts for these?
So the dollar amounts are not part of this matrix. They are part of the other list that you saw, which was just our priorities list. This is a matrix that is from that list. So no, dollar amounts are not included on this. Otherwise,
But this list is intended to roll up to go to CDOT to be considered for the 10-year plan.
This list was a request at the council meeting, so this is solely for council members. The list that I brought and discussed last month with the dollar amounts and all that, that is the list that would be forwarded on to CDOT. This is solely as a
I think
request.
we asked for this to see where these projects and where do they fall in our criteria of RTP. I think we asked last month, right?
Well, these are the RTP's criteria. These are TC's criteria.
Right. So I remember that. I guess I just didn't realize it was only for a subset. So it's hard not having the two lists side by side to understand what we saw last month and what we're seeing here. So I'm just trying to understand the relationship of those. And so I get, and I appreciate the additional work you've done to identify how they align with the guiding principles. That's great. I'm just trying to get I was trying to get an understanding of one, what kind of price tag are we talking about for this, what I understand to be a subset of the top priority projects, and so we can understand the magnitude of them. And then would the matrix that you created apply to the other projects that are on your top tier list?
So I think the projects are the same. I don't think they've changed. These are the projects. It's not a subset. This is the top tiered projects. They just got reordered a little differently by the corridor instead of just by listing each project.
And the funded project was removed, so that's why it would also apply.
Yeah.
This is the tier one.
Okay,
This is tier one list,
yeah.
yes.
okay, so that's helpful, that this is the full tier 1 list.
Roadway, yes. And what we have been told is that for the North Front Range piece of the Region 4 piece of the 10-year list, 10-year funding is about $5 million a year. So none of these projects are. So we 50 million over or 55 million over 10 years, so 5.5. So yeah, none of these projects are.
Right, I just think it's helpful for people to see the full picture and to see the magnitude of the dollars that we're talking about. And you're right, the 10-year plan amounts are never the full amount to fund the whole project. They're meant to create leverage opportunities and partnerships and all of those things. So just for me, it would be helpful to see the costs associated with these as well. And it would be helpful to understand.
And that would be what is incorporated by reference into the RTP.
And then what happens to the transit list and
all of the lists are incorporated. This is just solely the tier 1 list. That this has been done with, since those are the projects that have risen to the top, regionally significant projects. These are the region's top priorities, so that's why these were put into this matrix.
But I guess what I'm not seeing, so I get this now, it's the top tier roadway list. And I'm just curious, often it seems that the transit lists fall to the wayside as these things percolate up. So I just was asking where the rest was. So all I'm saying is it would be helpful to see the price tag and to see the other modes included along with the roadway.
Yeah, we have that. I mean, it's all there. And the reason we were just focusing on this one, just on the roadway, is because the transit list and the non-motorized list are pretty short. And that's why we didn't go through this exercise.
And the other thing is we want to shore these up so they meet the TC's requirements. And when you look at this list and you see that we don't have a checkbox, I call it a measle chart, right? And we don't have a checkbox in there, are we going to be able to compete with the Dr. Cogs or the Colorado Springs Cogs? And I think our job is to look at this list and see if we need to improve our scopes, right? Tell the story. And this list was for is, are we meeting the TC's requirements in our tier 1? But you look at, can you go back the other way a little bit?
Right, there's almost nothing under.
Yeah, there's a lot of things, a lot of boxes missing that I think we got to shore these projects up and see what kind of story and what we can do to tell a better story on these projects. The best way is if they're all checked and we're looking really good.
Because there's not a single one that has all of them marked,
Right.
is that?
Right.
And it's not just dressing them up to check the box, but what's the nature and scope of the project, the scope of the investment?
And I think the other thing we can think of, and again, as this gets closer, we can reflect that the cost estimate in the next several years is going to change. But the number one transit project is on US 34. That's the number one on that list. So 34 is the top priority highway list. 34 transit is the top transit list. I mean, it seems to make sense that we have sort of that working relationship between those two lists. I don't remember off the top of my head what the non-motorized list.
It's also
It's also along 34. So
that would be a really great opportunity to combine the scope of that project to describe that it's got highway, transit, bike ped improvements within it versus isolating out the modes, I guess. If you're trying to create a compelling investment strategy that's going to use the phrase check all the boxes, then it would have all those pieces. And so that's the suggestion. And I thought we talked a little bit about that last time, about how do you roll up the scope of these projects so that the other multimodal components don't get
lost.
Yes. So that would be the suggestion.
So just to move forward with this is that the list that we're talking about is going to get incorporated by reference into the RTP. Again, none of these, I mean, the 10-year list has already been sort of listed and said, here are the projects through 2030. So our first opportunity to move anything on this list of the 10-year pipeline is 2031. So we'll probably have a lot more opportunity to blend and talk about how we're going to actually show these things. I think maybe by reference, the list from last time, and maybe even showing some of this, this matrix to go along with it. And then as we get closer to the next funding opportunity on the 10-year pipeline, that's when we need to really start thinking about how do we fill in more of these check boxes, how do we tell a better story, and starting really ramping up the advocacy. Although I say
we'll have
Right,
an
and
RTP
combine-
by that point as well, so.
Yeah. And then combining the modes into one overarching scope so that it's not bifurcated by.
Yeah, I think that was a requirement when we first did it, was to bifurcate it, and I think that's why.
And I also think there's different project sponsors, so they're not all the same project sponsors. It's also part of that.
Right, if you look at the current 10-year plan, there'll be a corridor project and it'll have all those components in it and then it has dollar amounts associated. And then my understanding, the new legislation that passed will also say what's the total cost of the project and then what's the piece from the 10-year plan, which I also think is a helpful story to tell, because if it's a $100 million project and there's $5 million available from the 10-year plan, it makes it very clear how much leverage is needed for that. So it kind of paints a whole picture. So just trying to be helpful in terms of how to position these projects so that they are competitive and get a spot in the overall spreadsheet as it goes forward. So that's the intent behind the suggestions.
Well, and in the multimodal and the transit pieces, I mean, you know, when I think about the NAPNI dollars, the non-attainment dollars, I mean, there's millions of dollars that are, and I mean, I think that BRT is one of the projects that we're going to be looking at. So, you know, we have projects that, I mean, obviously I serve on the NAMI, so it's hard for me to say our projects are the best, but I mean, we do have good projects, but if they are, they are. And so, you know, I think that as those dollars become free, that really can make, you know, we have some additional dollars that aren't in some of these statewide models that are not, and these pots of money are growing. So.
Taking back to the purpose of this evening's conversation and what you need us to accomplish, that would be.
Just head.
We are aware. Okay. Thank you, Ben.
So can I add something really quick to this conversation?
Johnny, I'm trying to move this damn thing.
I know you are. One of the things that really upset me at STAC today that I haven't talked to you about was they're doing transit town halls around the state, and Northern Colorado's not getting them. So I made a pretty good point today that we're sitting here doing transit and we're pretty involved with GET, with Transport, with Colt, and we have a very active regional connectivity with a lot of this stuff. But email said for a multitude of reasons, they decided not to do one in Northern Colorado. So
two of the reasons is they can't get out of their Denver Boulder bubble, and I will make that, I will reflect.
So I wanted to let you know that, and Suzette sent an email and I articulated, and I think you're on it.
Yeah, I like those things too, yeah.
And I agree with you 100%. I mean, I learned last week that they were even doing transit town halls, and I learned that at a C.4P meeting. And so it's like, what the heck? There should be more engagement, and obviously transit is central to the work that's going on.
Well, here we are talking about our plan and transit and all the things we're doing, but Northern Colorado doesn't even get a town hall to talk about it.
Yeah, I'm glad that you raised that.
Robust stakeholder process.
In Denver, they think we're close to Wyoming.
Well, they don't think it's anybody else here.
I would advocate right now to let your commissioner know and let your chair and your executive director.
And I will raise this and you can raise it
Okay, I'll
individually.
send you an email.
Yeah.
So I would just say Brian Metzger did respond to the email I sent out and said, we're not, for the variety of reasons, we weren't going to have a meeting up in North Front Range, but if you really want one, we will schedule one.
Yes.
So the answer would be yes.
And if it's best, if there's one email and then we all send it, you know, you copy us in and then we can all send it
Add
to,
our names.
add our name.
Bombard.
Yeah. Whatever Will writes, I'll just sign my name.
And I'm your transit coordinator, so I'm really upset about it, to be
Right.
honest.
Well, thanks.
Yeah.
So
Thanks for bringing it up.
the other suggestion would be, if you do want to write a letter, have it be for the Transportation Commission in June. We're getting an update on transit, is my understanding, so that would be really good timing.
So should we write a letter or should we just try to set up?
I would just see if we could get, I don't think I didn't read we're gonna get a town hall, but they're more than willing to come up and talk with us. And I mentioned coming here, but I personally think it's pretty advantageous that we're involved.
No,
Yeah,
get out of there.
Okay.
I will.
You're trying.
Thank you, online attendance, for
Trying.
expressing my opinion.
Sorry, thank you.
Okay. Chair, you've lost control of your own destiny. We are at number 18, 2050 RTP fiscally constrained plan. Anna Rose.
Thank you. All right. So I wanted to bring to the council tonight another piece of the 2050 RTP as we get close to finalizing that process in the next few months. The Regional Transportation Plan is federally required to be fiscally constrained, which means that the total estimated cost of maintaining and improving the transportation system cannot exceed the reasonably anticipated forecasted revenue over the time horizon of the plan. And so that few of the things that means for our plan is that we have to create system level estimates for the cost of the projects and the assumptions that are incorporated into the plan. And so the cost to operate and maintain the federal aid highways and public transportation, and then also all of the reasonably anticipated revenue, whether that's public, so state or federal funds, and private, so like developer funds, things like that. And we have to define that all by funding source. So the another federal requirement for this plan is the identification of funding for projects and programs within the RTP, and that's all reflected in year of expenditure dollars. So any of the funding estimates that we have, we forecast out with an inflation rate to 2050, and we have used a 2.5% inflation rate over the life of this plan. So we have compiled the revenue information from a variety of sources to create our fiscally constrained plan. The first of which is the CDOT program distribution. So for those of you who are involved with STAC, know that they are currently working on developing the next round of program distribution. But as we have to complete this plan by September, we will be using the 2045 program distribution that was created a few years ago, and then extrapolated out to 2050 to cover those last 5 years. We also look at local jurisdiction budgets for any of the local revenue for roadway operations, maintenance, and improvements. We use FTA funds and get the information from the National Transit Database. We also get input from our Technical Advisory Committee on the roadway operations and maintenance and intersection improvement costs. Transit agencies provide the information for transit maintenance. NOCO by Comped has provided the information for trail operations, maintenance, and construction costs. And then we also look at the local plans for anticipated projects and costs associated with that. So a few of the assumptions that we have in the plan for roadway operations is an amount to operate and maintain per roadway mile. And so for operations, we're looking at $27,000 per lane mile, and that includes lighting, traffic control, snow and ice removal, design, planning. Design, planning, and engineering are not part of that. It's just that first part, lighting, traffic control, snow and ice removal. Then roadway maintenance is about $13,000 per lane mile, and that's for resurfacing costs. For transit operations and maintenance, we're looking at about $23 million per year, which includes the operations and maintenance of vehicles, general administration, facility maintenance, and the state of good repair of vehicles. So when you bring all of that information together, this is what we're looking at for the cost of maintaining and operating our, the revenues that we have to go to maintaining and operating our system. So what you see from this chart here is that the bulk of the money that we have in the region comes from the local sources. So that's looking at taxes and fees and things like that come from the local budgets. Followed by the state funding is the next highest source. The NFRMPO only controls about $363 million of funding over the life of this plan. So this is looking 2024 to 2050. And then there also is the developer funds, so those private funds and then the federally controlled funding. So what that consists of is mainly FTA funds, and then a lot of the discretionary grants that come out of the federal government are included in those federal revenues. We take that information from all of the revenues and we categorize it based on different expenditure categories. So this is something that we had developed during the last RTP, and we have carried forward. So we have funds that are dedicated to certain project types that can only be used for those project types. And then we also have this last category that is flexible funding. So that can be used for a variety of project types. So that helps us allocate the revenue to the types of expenditures within the plan. So this is just looking at the proportion of the funding that we have by that expenditure category. So the majority of the funding that we have is that flexible funding. So then when we look at how the funds are allocated to actual projects in the region, we look at the different expenditure categories that are listed on the left-hand side of the screen here. So we have things like roadway operations and maintenance, and we have a certain amount of funding that is dedicated to that project type, and then the remaining is filled in with flexible funding. So with some of these categories, we ensure that they are fully funded. So things like roadway operations and maintenance, so that's maintaining our current system. We want to make sure that we have complete funding for maintaining that system. Also intersection improvement costs, building out our regional corridors, so that's the active transportation corridors, the transit corridors, and our regionally significant, the roadway projects, the capacity projects. Those are kind of the first priority when looking at allocating these funds. The column on the far right of the screen is the unfunded amount that we have when we look at these projects. So for instance, under the regional transit corridors for those regional, so this is not part of the local system, this is that connects throughout the region, that $1.3 billion that you see there that is unfunded, that is the amount that is front range passenger rail. So wanting to reflect that, but not actually having identified the dedicated funding sources to be able to fund that project. One of the topics that Medora will discuss after this discussion is the projects that the local communities have submitted for incorporation into the RTP. And there's a certain amount of those projects that are fiscally constrained, so the funding is reasonably assumed to be available for those projects, and then there's a certain amount of projects that are unconstrained. So that's what that unfunded request in that right-hand column is. And so we have that for the capacity projects on the regionally significant corridors, and then also non-regionally significant corridor capacity projects.
And
yes.
I just want to make sure everybody's understanding the dollars that you're looking at here. This is in thousands, so,
in millions.
So you're looking at, so the unfunded amount is 3.9 billion.
Yes.
And this is year to date, or is this 2050?
$2050.
Is this 2050 dollars?
Yes, this is $2050, the year of expenditure, so inflated out to 2050.
Johnny thought he was gonna stump it, but.
No, because I just know the front range passenger rail is well above $1.1 billion today. And if you look at 2050 and you multiply that times the 3.5 inflation rate, your future value is going to be more than $1 billion.
So the front range passenger rail assumption was from the cost assumptions that we had from the 2045 RTP. That is also only the proportion that is within the NFRMPO. If we do have better cost estimates, this is a draft of this, and so we can look further into that to make sure that that is that current cost is being reflected. But that is also only the portion within North Front Range.
I'm just thinking the numbers a lot lower for 2050.
I think they're too low. That's just my thought.
For more than Front Range passenger rail?
For a lot of it, like when you showed the cost per maintenance for resurfacing, and you had like 24, but that's what, 240,000 or 2.1 million a mile? Because we haven't been at 20, I don't know what it is, but that's
Yeah.
pretty low.
And we will also be discussing this with the TAC to ensure reasonableness of these assumptions. That 24,000 per lane mile, that was in 2023 dollars, but when we look at the total cost of operating and maintaining through the life of that plan, that would grow over the life of that plan. So that was in 2023 dollars. So when you look at what that cost per lane mile is in 2050, we are adjusting for that. And that's being reflected in that cost for roadway operations and maintenance.
Yeah, you definitely need to get someone to look at the numbers, because if you look at 24 feet wide, or let's say 12 feet wide, times 3 inches, times the length, you're going to be looking at $150 a ton. It's going to be more than 24,000, even if you just put a 2-inch overlay. So I'm pretty confident the numbers are going to be a little bit different, but I'll let it go. It's okay. It's just a plan.
Well, no, I agree with you. I think we need to look at this.
Yeah, and we will take this back to TAC as well to just ensure the reasonableness of that. And the operations and maintenance costs that we received were averaged over the data that was submitted to us. So we can make sure that does look reasonable to per lane mile and things like that. A few of the assumptions that I wanted to, there was one other thing I wanted to just point out here. So the revenue that we have identified is about $13 billion, and then you can see that the cost that we have identified is about $17 billion. So there is a certain amount of unfunded projects and programs that will be included in the plan. A couple of the things that we are assuming, as I had mentioned, build out of the regional active transportation corridors by 2045, which was identified in our last RTP. The Link-NOCO priority corridors, so those top 3 priority corridors, to be in operation by 2050. And then we had included the GHG strategy category when we did our 2022 update of the 2045 RTP. And we have carried that assumption over into this RTP as well. And so those greenhouse gas strategies include things like TDM-related projects. So, for instance, the TMO incubation funds that the council had approved last month, those types of programs would be included in those TDM-related projects. This can also include additional local bike and ped system expansion. So not necessarily looking at those regional corridors, but looking more at the local level. And then additional operational improvements that are identified to help reduce greenhouse gas. We have created an assumption for how much of each of these expenditure categories also help to achieve greenhouse gas reducing strategies, because there's a lot of co-benefits for different types of projects. So that's what this table is illustrating here. So of the funding that we have identified for the funded projects, about 24% of that will go, we assume will go directly to those greenhouse gas strategies. So the question that we have for the Planning Council is looking at the priorities of funding projects, as we do have a certain amount of unmet need, but we also have an amount of remaining flexible funding that can be allocated to any of these project categories or expenditure categories. As I mentioned, this is a draft, so that $254 million that we have still available might change depending on finalizing some of the numbers here. But the question would be for council is, when we look at where we want those remaining flexible funds to go to, what the priority would be. So some the categories that have the unmet need are the regional transit corridors, the Front Range Passenger Rail, the regionally significant corridor capacity projects, the non-RSC capacity projects. Those are the three areas that we have identified an unmet need for. And then another option that, even though it's not reflected here as an unmet need, is to be able to allocate the remaining flexible funding to those greenhouse gas reduction strategies. So we have identified approximately $3.5 million per year over the life of the plan for those greenhouse gas reduction strategies. So if the priority of the council was to allocate funds to that category, that total funded assumption would be increased for that. One of the things that I will also mention is that Medora is going to be talking about the projects, those RSC capacity projects, I believe, in our next discussion item. And so if this question can also be answered after that discussion, depending on council's feelings on it.
Thoughts on flexible funding?
I think those are capacity projects. Because you're gonna hit a lot of the other categories. You're gonna also do greenhouse gas, you're also gonna be doing safety, you're gonna be doing maintenance, and that will get a lot of the categories put together.
Will the capacity projects address, I mean?
Well, it's a known fact that if a car's sitting on a road and it's sitting there puffing, it produces more greenhouse gas.
We just saw the information on the induced demand as well, so then you have this balancing act.
In my mind, there's no balancing act, it's put capacity. There's enough slush funding in this state for greenhouse gas projects. We're blue in the face as we sit in our cars in traffic jams. I would be one for, and quite frankly, not a dime will go from at least a vote of mine to a Front Range passenger rail when it doesn't touch one square inch of Weld County. So therefore, I'm supportive of John's suggestion of capacity projects. Other thoughts?
Well, I mean, we just heard from the demographers too about, an aging population. I mean, I understand people's problem with Front Range passenger rail, but I mean, Mustang and some of the other projects, I think are really important when we think about our demographic changes.
Yes, and so for Mustang and those other regional corridors, we are assuming that those are constrained. So that unconstrained portion of the regional is just specifically for that Front Range passenger.
Oh, just for the Front Range?
Yeah.
I mean, can it get split up between, I don't know.
Other thoughts?
I'm with capacity. And then you can have your 16-year-olds drive your elderly because there's more room. So.
I'm for capacity. When I look at the demographers graphs, I saw an aging population moving into Fort Collins, moving into Larimer. So it's capacity for basically all the homes we're building. I mean, the growth is going to be crazy. I think we're declining the population, that's great for the state, but Weld is growing and Larimer's growing.
Yeah, capacity is where it's needed.
Where would safety focused projects fall? Under the roadway?
Capacity.
No, is it roadway operations and maintenance? I mean, because I guess that's the other area that I hear about all the time in terms of emails and phone calls I get is about roadway maintenance and potholes, and we're not keeping up with the system that we have. So I'm curious about.
So there's zero unfunded dollars up there on roadway operations and maintenance.
So somehow between now and 2050, we're going to catch up with, I think the last I heard it was, we need an extra $100 or $300 million a year statewide to catch up with our roadway maintenance. So based on this, you're saying forecasting wise, we're all caught up with basic road maintenance.
Based on the identified operations and maintenance costs, we were able to, that was the first line of where that flexible funding goes and that dedicated funding goes. Yes.
So.
I find it surprising
Yeah.
given the state of our roads today and the state of the phone calls and emails, but if
Yeah,
you're
but a
saying
lot-
it's all caught up and we don't need any more for operations and maintenance, I'm surprised by that. But if that's what the data says, then that's fine. But to me, I guess that would be another consideration is if there was an available balance, how do we take better care of the system we have today? And that's,
This doesn't include just state highways. This is our local roads too.
right, I know, I'm
So
talking about. it's
local
all-
roads are in a lot better shape than state highway.
But everyone's struggling with operations and maintenance.
And
Well,
I think that,
Not everyone.
Well, maybe not
Well,
everyone.
is fine.
But many of the people I talk with bring up issues that are related to basic care and feeding of the existing systems.
and so I think maybe a correction to what I said or a point of clarification, it wouldn't be, I don't think that the assumption is that it would be at 100%, like maintain, that this is 100% complete improved, but to at least have maintain to the existing conditions. I think that would probably more be the assumption.
I mean, it just came up again at the 4P meeting last week was the issue about resources for basic core services, so, and asset management. So that's why I'm raising it again. Before building more new anything, it seems like we should do a really good job taking care of what we have, whether it's local, regional, state, federal, whatever, taking care of the existing system is important. Just 2 cents worth.
I wonder if that's a function of a state like Denver region and such having a lot older roads and bridges that basically are dangerous. And we're still, we kind of exploded in the last, say, 30 years from farm fields to what we have today, that our roads are still newer in the relative term.
And I can't speak to that, but the calls I get are from people who live up here and have businesses
I
up
think the
here
roads
and
are
are
terrible, but it's
complaining
a question of quality. What would you accept?
It's all relative.
What do you want to pay for?
Yeah, so I'm just raising it as an option in terms of care and feeding of the existing system versus building more new. It's a policy question.
So I just maybe want to try to make sure I'm saying this correctly. So when I'm looking at this slide, that left category saying these are just the categories, the pots that we're needing to expend. What you're looking at for the funding is that we're saying, like, for example, on the regional transit corridors, that's predominantly transit money that can't go anywhere else, what has to go there, right? So when you sort of take, and I'm having done this in the past, when you start to take all those pots of money and the money that's coming in, it's pretty much said, this is where you're gonna put it, right? So that's what I think this is showing. And then to say, and I'm gonna guess, most of this, the flexible money is mostly STBG, probably, or state money that is more flexible. So if you could pick which category on this list to put it in, where would you put that? Not to say that it has to go there, but I think that's, am I reading this correctly, that NROs, is that how this works? Is that you're saying these are the categories and that the money is already sort of predetermined in which categories for most of it is going, and now we just have this little bit left. Out of $13 billion, we have $254 million that we can pick and choose where we want to put it.
Yes, based on the unmet need.
To be constrained. This is all about being constrained.
So, I mean, I don't know that we've heard some conversations about putting it on capacity, maybe splitting it up, putting it on maintenance, maybe putting some on transit. I mean, I don't know if council feels like there's any.
Well, can I ask a question? And I'm sorry if I missed this, because I feel like my key points are going down the later it gets. But with HD reduction strategies, I mean, are we achieving what we need to do with the dollars that we have? Then we are. So this would be just additional strategies that would help us get things even lower?
So this, the assumption for greenhouse gas reduction strategies was built into the greenhouse gas transportation report.
Sure.
And so this would be to meet those types of requirements for, the certain proportion of our funding would go towards projects that help us meet those standards.
Right. So things like we identified, like more roundabouts or things like that? Is that what we're talking about, or?
I think with like more expanded TEM work, and I don't remember more transit. Those were the two that stick in my mind.
Yeah, so the GHG strategies that would not be including the roundabouts, that was one of the separate mitigation strategies.
Oh, mitigation.
So this is looking more at kind of the programmatic side. So TDM, some of it could be, for the local bike and ped network and operational improvements. That's the idea for those. Some of the like intersection improvements, because as I think, so a certain proportion of like our intersection improvement projects would assume for greenhouse gas reducing. So we had identified about 9% of that funding. So some of that is being reflected in those projects.
But what I thought you asked was, given the level of investment you're showing in here for greenhouse gas reduction strategies, are you achieving the target?
Yes, and so also Medora will be presenting on the greenhouse gas transportation report at the end of this meeting as well. So some of the more specific greenhouse gas.
You mean there is an end to this meeting?
1 o'clock.
Wonder.
This is my last item.
So majority.
I think.
Andrew, if you needed an answer on this tonight.
A general direction is good for when we, bring back a more finalized, fiscally constrained plan of, where that priority is of additional funding, whether it's 254 million or if it's less or more, depending on how adjustments to the plan, where our priority should go when allocating those.
Is this a decision we need to make tonight?
That's what I was just asking. So she states in a general direction, so.
And let's remember, this is more funny money than monopoly money.
Yeah, right. But it's so far out there that, yeah.
It's reasonably anticipated.
Yeah.
It's monopoly money might have more value than this money.
This is 2050.
2050.
2050 money.
Yeah.
I'll be dead.
I've been thinking all along, where's Johnny in 27 years when, what's that real number for 2050?
Right here.
Thank you, Anna Rose. Perhaps it's best if we move on in your Medora's report as well. $20.50.
Yeah.
60. Yeah. Oh, with you. Yeah, 2050 realistically.
See, now it'd be like the
They may still be in this meeting.
Yeah.
Just kidding.
Yeah, so for the next several hours, we'll be talking about.
Oh, now you get funny. You get funny in your last meeting.
Yeah. Okay, in your keynotes packet is a list of the major roadway and transit projects that were submitted by our local entities that we want you to review, that we will then incorporate into the RTP. Now, Rose laid the foundation that per federal requirements, we do need to specify what projects are fiscally constrained, which projects do we think will receive funding within the lifetime of this plan. Projects that get included in the RTP are then eligible to apply for federal and state grants. A lot of the time, grant applications ask, is this project consistent with your regional plan? If it's a fiscally constrained project in the plan, the answer is yes. So this is critical to make sure that those key projects are reflected in this plan as fiscally constrained. And especially for those projects that are anticipated to go forward in the next 4 or 5 years, really important to make sure that they're in the plan and in an earlier staging period. So what we have are 4 staging periods. These are set based on the federal requirements for air quality. And so we have a period from 2024 to 2026, 2027 to 2030, 2031 to 2040, so each project is assigned one of these categories based on the input we got from the local communities. We asked for these projects in early this year, and we had TAC review this list at their meeting last month. They had some time to submit comments, and those comments are reflected in these tables here. What else do we need to note? The unconstrained projects. So the unconstrained projects are projects that we do not anticipate to have funding for. Another way to think about them is these are not priority projects for our regionally significant corridors. The benefit of putting them in there is that it helps us tell the story of what the unmet need is for the region, and it also identifies what projects would we fund if additional money became available. All right, so there are a few maps. Figure 1 shows the fiscally constrained projects that were submitted on the regionally significant corridors. There is a definition we're using. Only projects that meet this regionally significant definition are included, and that is things like adding 2 through lane miles or adding a new intersection. There are many other projects that are important that need to happen that are not shown on here because they don't rise to that level of significance, which is derived from the federal requirements on air quality. So we are just looking at these major changes like adding through lanes or a new interchange. This map highlights in yellow the locations of the projects. They're labeled with a number that then corresponds to the table later in this memo. And this map also shows the projected number of lanes on these facilities. So that helps clarify what the system will look like.
What are we showing on I-25?
Oh, I-25, yes, good point. So in our model, the express lanes are coded separately from the general purpose lanes, and so the map just is not very good at communicating what actually is the vision for I-25. The fiscally constrained plan is to add the express lanes throughout. On the unconstrained list is the third general
Isn't that already funded?
Yes, yes. Let me bring up the table. So what we have in our RTP is 2024 is the first year that we're showing projects open.
Okay.
So because express lanes are opening in 2024, we're showing them in that staging period. We are showing a cost of $0 because the funds for those projects came from 2023 or earlier, which is in the text of this memo explaining that apparent anomaly. There's at least one other project that is in the same boat of having an opening year in 2024 and the funds already fully available for previous years. The unconstrained list for I-25 has the general purpose widening from 2 lanes to 2 lanes. So figure 2 highlights the unconstrained projects on the regionally significant corridors. And figure 3 shows the general location of those transit projects per the regional transit corridors that council approved last year. So fiscally constrained those new service or enhanced service on those corridors. So with what Anna Rose said was about $250 million that could be assigned. One thing you could look at or tackle at is, are there projects on this unconstrained list, several projects that we might want to move into the constrained set of projects with that extra $200 million. So then I'll turn it back to you. Are there any questions or comments before we get to our last discussion item?
Dora, so this list of projects is typically around meeting our regionally significant criteria for conformity, right? So it's 1 lane mile or 2 lane miles?
2 lane miles.
2 lane miles of capacity improvement, or is a regionally significant transit service? Mm-hmm. And there are some definitions around that.
Yes.
So that's what this list is. So it's that bigger thing that's really sort of, this is what's helping us run conformity, is this list. It's not there may be other projects like the pedestrians, but that's corridors, but that does not help us when we're running conformity.
The key thing for conformity is that the requirements are that any of these major changes to the system get modeled so that the impact then gets assessed for our emissions. So it's setting the bar pretty high. Is this substantially impacting vehicle trips or transit trips? If so, you need to specifically identify the project, model it, and then send off that or analyze the emissions and see if you're under the budgets. So the projects that are, there's so many other projects that are important as well, and those get captured in the RTP in some of the programmatic discussions, and that threshold is set based on the federal requirements.
But that's why you see a lot of widening. This is why this list is saying widening, widening, widening. It's because of that definition.
Yes.
Questions? John?
Nope.
No? Okay. He's thinking about you.
That was a pretty good strike right there.
Greenhouse gas, please.
Okay. Great. So it's been a while since we've talked about greenhouse gas. As a refresher, this Transportation Commission adopted the standard, the Greenhouse Gas Transportation Plan Standard in 2021, which required MPOs and CDOT to demonstrate greenhouse gas emission reductions relative to baseline plans. For our region, it applies to our RTP, and now it also applies to our TIP. Last year was the first time we had to do this type of assessment, and at that time, they just made it applicable to the RTP. So for this 2050 RTP effort, we'll be doing a greenhouse gas transportation report for both the RTP and the TIP. The report gets reviewed by the Air Pollution Control Division, or ABCD, and then goes to TC for their approval. This schedule you see along the top is on the greenhouse gas transportation report. So we are having a discussion tonight at council. We'll be asking for action at the July council meeting, and then mid-July it gets submitted to ABCD and Transportation Commission with TC action scheduled for the August TC meeting. Along the bottom of the schedule is the schedule for adopting the RTP and the TIP. So August council discussion of those two and September action. So just wanted to point out, we're looking for action from council on this report prior to sending it off for approval by TC. There are a few things that are new compared to the report we developed last year. So we have an additional compliance here that we need to report on because of the TIP. There's a requirement to report emissions from the last year of the Transportation Improvement Program, which will be 2027. So we have a new compliance here in the report. We have updated our land use and travel demand models we talked about earlier. We have an updated set of roadway projects, which we are still finalizing, and we have added some specificity on the greenhouse gas strategies. A lot is staying the same, however. Our baseline is still the 2045 Regional Transportation Plan that was approved in 2019 based on the greenhouse gas standard. It's not trying to shift and keep shifting and keep shifting, but it looks at the baseline plan, and you need to have a certain reduction from that plan, and that baseline stays the same. So we're still looking at that previous 2045 RTP as a baseline. Our draft runs are showing compliance in all years, so we expect that to stay the same. We are looking at the same 4 sets of greenhouse gas strategies that we used last year, and we do not think we'll need any of the greenhouse gas mitigation measures, which are those measures that get added sort of on top of the plan and then require some additional reporting requirements. So we do not anticipate needing those. This chart shows the reduction levels required for our region, with gray the target greenhouse gas and the purple representing what we would need to reduce based on the requirements of the standard, with 2040 being the most steepest drop, 9.9%. I don't have 2027 on there, but it's simply interpolated between the requirements for 2025 and 2030. We have 4 sets of strategies: active transportation, transit, operations, and TDF. So in our updated plan, what we get to take credit for is what is different compared to our baseline plan. So what I'm talking about in these categories are the new commitments in our updated plan that weren't in the 2045 RTP. So expanded transit service on Colt, increased service on Mustang, other regional transit corridors. Addition of 5 mobility hubs, that comprises our transit investments. Under TDM, we have increasing work from home, development of regional TDM programming that grows in effectiveness over time. Under operations, commitments to arterial signal timing improvements, and under active transportation, significant expansion of our local bicycle and pedestrian network with increased prevalence of e-bikes and scooters that makes it easier to get around, safer to get around. So with these strategies, we've modeled them in our travel demand model, and we see the impact of these strategies. This is one way to look at it, which is the mode share and how that changes. So the blue columns are the baseline plan results for 2050, and the green bars are the updated plans results. So you have fewer single occupant vehicle trips, more walk trips, more bicycle trips, more transit trips, and the influence on vehicle miles traveled per capita is a decrease from a forecasted rate of 27.6 miles per day according to the baseline plan and 24.4 miles per day according to the updated plan. So this table is showing those greenhouse gas emissions in million metric tons and the reductions that we're seeing between the two sets of estimates and how those meet the required reduction levels. The plan is going to be released. This is the main content of the plan in this presentation, but the actual document itself will be available in mid-June, and then we will be asking council to adopt that in July. I'll turn it to the chair.
Questions for Medora, please? Thank you. Okay.
Medora, any last thoughts? This was your opportunity. Anything about Suzette you want to?
Outro, yeah.
Or about anybody else.
Yeah.
It's been so great working here and working with all of you, and I know I'll get to see you more in the future.
That's a cool role you're going into, it sounds like.
You will be very missed.
Are you going to work directly with municipalities or everyone? Or?
Yeah, I'll be working with the MMY program and the Main Streets program, so yeah, more work with communities.
So thank you for your work here. Appreciate it.
Still anything about Suzette you would like?
Still wants her last check. All right, let's move on to council reports. Transportation Commission, Commissioner Brackey, please.
I'll be very quick in the interest of time, but hopefully people have seen the information that's gone out about the additional funding that TC approved last month, additional $25 million for road repair across the state, dealing with all of the winter-related impacts. Also additional, I think about $8 million for improvements on North I-25, so north of Fort Collins up to Wellington. So again, road repair, maintenance type work there. I want to give a shout out to Heather and her team for hosting the 4P meetings around the region. I know they were out on the circuit a lot and had the meetings with Morgan County and Weld County, ones coming up with Larimer. So those are great meetings. Encourage you to attend or others. Very informational. And let's see, I think those are the main ones. I'll definitely take back the comment about the transit town hall, see what we can do there, share with me information you're getting. Okay. So I think, and then again, just from a safety moment standpoint, May was Motorcycle Safety Awareness Month. Colorado hit an unfortunate record high of motorcycle crashes this past year. So again, a lot of campaigns going out around look twice and save a life, but all of us know people who ride motorcycles, and so please be safe and be on extra lookout for them. So thank you.
I have to say something here. I heard today that potentially this could be your last meeting with us too,
I don't know.
but we don't know that for
I
sure.
don't know that for sure. So my term is up in July, so we'll see where it goes from there.
So I heard you had an interview with the governor possibly today and
With their office.
their office.
Yeah, just not him.
So we'll know,
I don't rank that high.
we'll know soon if you'll be rejoining us again.
Yeah. So if I thought, I just, again, thank you. It's been an amazing 4 years. It's amazing to me that 4 years went by fast. It's like a blink.
Yeah.
So anyway, but you guys are doing great work. I always talk about the North Front Range and all the work that's going on up here and as a role model for other parts of the state. So it's truly been a gift and an opportunity to work with you all. I think we've accomplished a lot. When I first got here, it was all about segment 5 on I-25, and that is on its way, and it has a delivery method and it has funding identified. So I'm glad, and that, again, that's a testament to all the work that's done up here collaboratively. So yeah, so we'll see how it goes.
Well, we hope to see you next month.
Well, thank you.
But if not, thank you for everything you've done.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
CDOT Region 4 update. Heather, if you are still here, you deserve a medal.
I am here. So real quick, just gonna ping, Commissioner Brackey already mentioned it, our 4P meetings. We hit most of the counties. We do have Larimer County coming up June 29th and another Weld County one June 22nd. So we really encourage participation in those meetings. Also wanted to note those funds coming from TC. We do have a concrete panel replacement project going to advertisement here in the very near future. That'll go from 14 up past Owl Canyon. We also, as part of those commission funds, are getting 257, a portion of that reconstructed north of Windsor. And then our current resurfacing project is, they should be setting cones anytime if they haven't already. And that is from basically 34 up to Walnut Street on the south side of Windsor. So a lot of construction going on, and I'm going to just keep it short and sweet. Thank you. Actually, Medora, really excited to have you on the team. Big loss for North Front Range, huge win for CDOT. So thank you, and I really look forward to working with you.
Can I add to her report to say not only is CDOT milling and overlaying from basically the railroad tracks by our cemetery all the way down to State Farm at 34, all of that, which is going to take a long time. But we've also got the 6 to 8 month intersection of 257 in Eastman Park that involves the railroad, CDOT, Weld, it's crazy, and it's all happening at the same time. So I don't want to tell you to avoid the east side of Windsor, but don't come down to it. It's gonna be a mess. So
thank you, Heather.
Thanks to CDOT for helping us out with
that. Staff report is written. Colorado Transportation Investment Office report is written. NAPNY, Commissioner Stevens.
Yeah, we met on May 25th. We met in person for the very first time. We will have around $6.62 million for this fiscal year. So we're looking at ways to, we're looking at how we want to spend the dollars, probably coming up with some criteria. We are talking about bus rapid transit, but some of that is several years away. So looking at sidewalk and bike infrastructure, but open to other things.
Okay. Very good, thank you. Front Range Passenger Rail District, Will and/or John.
I was not at, were you there?
No, I was there.
Oh, I was not at Friday's meeting.
Basically, we went through a lot of, still going through a lot of the planning. We got a good presentation on the public meetings. Everybody in here should be getting some data from the consultants asking you to attend the Front Range Passenger Rail stakeholder meeting. Those are going to be going on. You guys, all the communities, local communities should have got those.
Ours is in June, so.
Yeah, but they should be coming out. So just be prepared. They're looking for voices of what they want, where they, it's just going to be that process. They're going to have probably a couple rounds of those. Went through some of the criteria that we want to evaluate through the service development plan, and it's a long 2 slow hour meeting.
2 hours is amazing.
As opposed to this 3 hour and 18 minutes.
This is good information.
What do they do to be so efficient? All
I
right.
got one to go 11.
And your definition of fun is, way different.
Skipping right over TPR boundary study. We've already done that. Host council member report, John.
I have 14 projects I was gonna go through, but since it's late, I'll just stick to a couple things. One is interesting, the presentation today, because one of the things that Greeley has really seen in the last couple of years is our average age is like 36.1 plus or minus. In Greeley, 90+% of the people that moved in or that migrated in over the last 2 years have been people of color. Our community has grown a lot from the migration out of Denver to Greeley. I think a lot of their data points were right. Greeley has grown substantially in the last 2 years. Some of the things that we're experiencing, I can go through the projects, but I'm not going to do that. But the two that I will talk about is 35th and 47th. Big projects for us, the merge grant. Paul's giving presentations on that. We saw a presentation on the US 34 Coalition on 17th, County Road 17. When you start looking at the mobility of people getting from Greeley to Loveland, Greeley to Fort Collins, getting that transit system set up so we can move people more efficiently through there and breaking down the bottlenecks with all the signals, I think it's going to be important for the region and it's going to be important for Greeley. So that's where I'll stay. There's a lot of good things going on. I don't know if you guys know our logo. It's story best lived in is what Greeley's logo motto is. It's a cool thing. It's my Greeley, but it's extended to a story best lived in. So every week we tell a great story about where we are, and Greeley's as Paul Harvey used to say, Greeley's on a roll. You know, he used bubble all the time. So that's all I have.
I just forwarded to Suzette the stakeholder meeting, which actually is June 5th, so Monday.
Oh, what time is that?
2 to 4, it'll be online. Right, am I right that the whole council here, right? Because we're all representing the north segment. So.
Yeah, I think it's for anybody.
Okay, so yeah, Suzette has it. Do you mind forwarding that out to the council members?
It's really elected officials and staff.
Okay, for elected officials and staff. It's online and then.
Everybody should have got an email.
I think I did, but.
No, you gotta know.
I'll send it. I'll always appreciate a second.
I need 3.
Johnny, great barbecue. As promised.
Well, I said if it was warm, but I said if he'd have got.
I said, where's the microwave?
If he'd have got here in time.
That was the problem getting here late, was cold barbecues.
Guys, thank you for all coming over to Greeley.
It was great. Yeah. It's a beautiful council chambers. First time I've been in here.
I think it's like 2 or 3, it's a few years old. It's not like in the last year.
It's been here longer than Johnny.
Longer.
Oh, yeah. It was here when I started.
All right, next month, topic suggestions, please go get those to Suzette or myself.
Meeting and severance.
Nothing else?
Severance.
We'll stand adjourned. Thank you.
Johnny, what's this across the street?
Oh, yeah?
We'll call it the That's like a pretty building now. White.
Oh, that's our city hall. That's our main building.
Was it made, ground up for a city hall? Like that? You didn't take anything over?
No, that's been.